Welcome to Lemoore City Council Chamber at 429 C Street. This is the June 19th meeting at 5:30. Special meeting agenda. Please silence all electronic devices as a courtesy to those in attendance. Thank you. If you don't mind standing for the invocation and then remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pastor Ash.
So all please bow your heads and close your eyes for a moment of reverence to the Lord. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity, Lord, to come before you once again, Father. Lord, I pray for your blessing upon all that takes place today, Father. Lord, we pray for your will to be done. I pray for your voice to be spoken and heard by all that are here today, Father, Lord. Touch our hearts, Father. We pray all these things in the mighty name of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, and all God's people said.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. Roll call, Marissa.
Councilmember Garza.
Here.
Councilmember Lyons. Councilmember Orth.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Warnick.
Here.
And Mayor Matthews.
Here.
Thank you.
Agenda approval, additions and or deletions. Moving on to closed session, item number 1, Government Code Section 54956.9, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation pursuant to paragraph 4 of subdivision D of section 54956.9, one case. We'll go ahead and adjourn into closed session. Got him.
anticipate those fund balances to land as of June 30th of 2024. This was previously in your old book, Schedule 3. This is the exact same data, just presented slightly different. And so I'll walk you through some of the fund summaries that like I did in the past. So first, we're going to start by discussing the position allocation. So each year we come to council and we ask for specific positions in each department. This year, I'm just going to scroll very quickly to the bottom. You're going to notice that we are asking for no additional personnel. There were originally requests for additional personnel, but those were omitted from this particular proposed budget due to budgetary constraints. We do, however, have two changes. The first is that in the previous years, including the current one, our finance manager lived 100% in the finance department. We're requesting that council allow us to allocate 50% of her FTE to utility billing because a large portion of her workload is to actually facilitate the utility billing process. That matters because of cost allocation, which I will discuss with you momentarily. The next change is that in the current budget, the wastewater department had originally asked us for 2 utility operator 1-2s. They no longer need 2. They would prefer to have a wastewater maintenance worker instead. So we have asked to reduce the number of operators by 1 and increase the number of maintenance workers by 1 in order to help facilitate wastewater's requests. So number of positions is net neutral. For purposes of budget, just know that operators are more expensive than maintenance workers. So it's actually a salary savings to do that for the wastewater fund. Do you have any questions about position allocation before I move on? Okay. I'm going to go back real quick because I want to show this cool thing. So on this digital budget book, we have, it links directly to American Survey. And if any of you are familiar with American Survey, it's the US government's, they have a segment that does the US Census. So it pulls all of your most recent census data and it comes with, and it automatically populates the census data that's most recent for our community. So it tells you what our current population was. It tells you age breakdowns by your population, household size, all kinds of things that we weren't able to include in our previous budgets. In case anybody that's perusing our budget wants to know about the city of Lemoore and how we're made up, it would be on this particular tab. We have an organizational chart, and yes, it is tiny, and there is not a way to make that larger in this system. However, when you look at the department tabs, which you'll find here, each of the department tabs has its own organizational chart shown so that you can see the specific org chart for that specific department. This one is for the city as a whole. We've
Michelle, I
included,
have a quick
Yeah.
question. I'm
Mhm.
sorry. I just noticed actually. I think it was a typo. So
okay,
just for clarification, actually your position actually shows 0.5 under city manager,
Mhm.
0.5 under finance, and also 0.5 under utility billing. I'm assuming one of those is not supposed to be
that's not correct. It should
Yeah.
be the finance manager that shows a 0.5. So where, I'm sorry, Ms.
utility
Mathis,
building division.
on that department's tab.
Mhm.
Oh, is it just in the organizational chart?
Yeah. So that
Okay.
should just be scratched. Is that?
Yeah,
correct?
so
Okay.
just for clarification, the mayor is indicating that on the utility billing tab, it indicates on the org chart that 0.5 of my position lives there. It does not. So just so that you know, mayor and members of council and the public, that doesn't actually roll up anywhere. We made those separate. So the salary was never assigned here. So there's no monetary correction, but we will correct that.
Thank you.
Do you have a way of assigning a dollar amount to that?
Yes, but not in the org chart. So the salaries that are built here, and I'll show those to you in a minute, are built off of the FTE. The org charts are just built separately, and that was just a typo. Okay, so we have the strategic plan. This came directly from the strategic plan that was adopted by council on May 9th, 2022. So this just allows the public to see the specific targets and goals that were originally identified by the council. And then we have the cost allocation plan. The cost allocation plan is a very lengthy, comprehensive, and often convoluted concept. But in general, if I was going to simplify this in the best way possible. This is the plan that the city uses to reimburse costs for service that are provided to our enterprise funds. So you have water, wastewater, refuse, golf, and fleet, as well as the successor agency and the housing authority that all receive some form of benefit from other city departments. That is the city council, the city manager's office, in some cases, human resources. And so this cost allocation plan is the plan that the city uses in order to charge the enterprise funds for the cost of service for the service providing departments. That gets very complicated. But without this, what would happen is the general fund would provide services to those enterprise funds, and we would not be able to recoup any of those costs. So the expenditures related to providing that service would be borne entirely by the general fund, and we would have no mechanism for recouping those. I'll explain a little bit more about how this applies to each of the budgets when we get into the fund summary tabs, but this particular document itself is incredibly comprehensive. It establishes the methodology that the council or the staff uses upon council's direction, the methodology that we use to basically assign those figures. Because cost allocation is complicated, the way that we are recommending that we do it for fiscal year 24 and in the future is that we're going to use actual numbers, so actual expenditures and revenues for each of the departments, as well as statistics from the most recently completed fiscal year. So what that means is the cost allocation numbers that you're going to see in this budget were built off of data from fiscal year 22, because we started this process in January and fiscal year 23 is still not yet done. So that means that your cost allocation is going to be, in theory, 2 years behind, but every year you're going to apply from the most recently completed fiscal year. It's convoluted, but it works. There is no format or like legal document that says you must do it a certain way. It just has to be legally defensible, and it has to be something that you can measure. And that's what this plan does. If council adopts this plan has been reviewed by our consultants. We've used similar cost allocation plans in previous years. The auditors like having this approved plan because it shows them that we're capturing that money based on actual approved metrics. So I'll explain a little bit more how that looks on the budget when we get into the fund summaries. Okay. Sorry, I should have done introduction first. Please forgive me. I'm learning how to use this new software like everybody else. Okay, so we're going to do fund summaries first. I am going to spend most of my time discussing these fund summaries. I am not going to drill down to the department level unless there are specific questions from council or the public, because the genuine story is what happens to the fund as a whole. So let's start with the general fund, because that is the one that is the most comprehensive. For those of you watching from home or in the audience, just know that the city is comprised of both general funds and enterprise funds, as well as special funds and impact funds. The general fund is basically the fund that you can use the money for absolutely anything and everything that's possibly needed. Water, refuse, and wastewater are funds where you can only use fees that are collected for service to provide that service. So for instance, we collect water fees. That's the cost of service the cost that it costs us to provide service for water. Those fees have to be used to support the water fund and cannot be used to support anything else. So if we send a utility bill and you pay a water bill, that money has to be used for your water service. It cannot be used to pick up your trash, so on and so forth. So this general fund is the fund that is the most comprehensive, and these funds can be used anywhere. This nifty little chart that you see here is driven by the actual software. And again, as we have more years built into this software, you'll have more years that you can actually go back and compare. This particular time, we only have fiscal year 23 and 24. And it shows you here that we had budgeted revenues of fiscal year 23 of 13.7 and budgeted expenditures of 16 million. What this chart doesn't show you is where we anticipate ending the year, and I will show you that momentarily. And so anyway, this will populate for anybody that's going online to look at this. So let's talk a little bit about the revenues. We have this portion of the comprehensive fund summary for the general fund breaks down the revenues and the expenditures for you. And it does go into further detail. I just want everybody to understand that FY 23 amended is the adopted budget plus any budget amendments that occurred from the time that we adopted as of July 1 of 2022 and the date that I pulled the data from the system. So once a budget is adopted by a governing body, there are certain times, most of the time actually, where when funds are going to be moved, particularly in and out of separate funds, that council's approval is required. So whenever we've moved money or we've asked to increase expenditures, those have come as budget amendments, and this fiscal year 23 amended column captures that data. So we have said that our amended budget for revenues for the general fund is at 13.7 million, 7.2. And we anticipate receiving 13.78. You can tell by looking at this that that's largely due to the fact that we're anticipating receiving more money in taxes this year than we anticipated. It's about a $57,000 increase. So it's not great, but we'll take any dollar that we can get. Next year, we're anticipating that we're going to receive about $16.4 million in revenue. I want to highlight a couple of things that are happening in these three columns in revenues. What you see at the beginning, directly under the column heading, is the fund balance at the beginning of the year that is in the column. So for instance, we anticipated our fund balance this year was going to be $8,877,095. We're not anticipating that that's going to change. However, when we took the budget for the current fiscal year, we anticipated there was going to be a $2.6 million deficit, which I'll explain later, which would have meant we would have started next year at about 5.8. We are not anticipating taking a $2.6 million hit this year. I'll get there in just a moment. That's this number down here.
Well, just one quick second.
Mhm.
So where would that 2.6 million show up here that the council approved?
It won't.
Why is not? We approved
Because it lives in the old legacy system, and I can't pull the budget from the legacy system, which is our current software. I can't pull a budget from the software once the budget has been amended. So every time we've gone to council and we've asked for a budget amendment and we've moved money within that budget, the way that that software works, I can't pull the original budget. It's because we're migrating systems, and any other year that wouldn't have been an issue, and in any other year that would have been included.
So if I went to a bank and said I needed $2 million,
Mhm.
Beginning of the year, and then somewhere around the end of the year, I said, I only used 500,000. I still owe the bank $2 million.
In this particular case, we never took the money from the bank, to use your analogy. We budgeted
But
like
we
we
also-
might need to, but we didn't need to. And I'm going to get to that in just a second.
So is that a policy decision, or is that?
So I don't think I understand your question,
Well, you
because
asked us to take money from the reserve to help balance the budget last year.
I asked for council to approve a budget that had the potential to have a $2.6 million deficit. That did not come to fruition. So we didn't need to take the money out of the reserves. And I'll explain why in just a minute. So next year, you see that our revenues have increased pretty substantially, and here's why. You can tell that our taxes are coming down a little bit. We're anticipating slightly less fees compared to where we plan to end this year, and the same thing for permits. It's important to note that the estimates that we receive for taxes, those are not numbers that I make up. So I contact the county, which is where largely most of our taxes come from, is a pass through the county. And I ask them to tell me how much money we're anticipated to receive, and they give me the breakdown. So this number is largely built by what is provided to me from the tax assessor's office at the county. Fees and licenses and permits are largely driven by activity for development within the community. So I talk to our planning and development office, as well as our building inspections office, and I say, hey, how many permits do you think we're going to issue next year? It's purely ballpark. So we can only go based on what we know is in the pipeline. We have no way of knowing what could be coming in the future. Having said that, we have issued a ton of permits this year for a lot of the subdivisions that have already been approved, and there aren't that many more left out there. So my anticipation is that these numbers are going to be slightly less than what we've seen this year for that purpose. Transfers. This is the one that I really want to talk about. So in this particular case, transfers is comprised of numerous line items, which I believe you can actually see in the book. And I can get there in just a minute. It's the way that this software categorizes an account. A lot of these are not technical transfers. Some of what this is reimbursement or fees for service. So anytime we're receiving payment because we've assigned a YDO to a school district, that revenue shows here as a transfer because we're receiving a fee for a service that we're providing. The biggest portion of this $4.5 million is the fact that we have gone ahead and we have transferred what was remaining in the ARPA fund. So back in 2020, when the American Rescue Plan was created, it came with a set of interim rules that told local government agencies how they could spend their money and when. And council took some action on that. They went ahead and allocated money to the fire department. They went ahead and allocated money for premium pay. And those were the two solid things that were discussed. There were other things that were discussed in concept, but a plan never came forward. And the reason for that is because during that time frame, the US government issued the final rule and it changed the rule. And it said that if you were a non-entitlement government unit, which we are, which is basically a population under 50,000, and you received less than 10 million, the recommendation was that those local government bodies accepted that ARPA money as general fund reimbursement for revenue loss. And so we have done that. What that means is the money that had not yet been spent can be used for any city purpose. Based on that final rule, our auditors and our financial consultants recommended that we physically make this transfer and not leave it sitting in its own fund any longer, because technically it can be used for anything and it belongs in the general fund. So of this 4.5 million, 3.47 million of that is a one-time transfer from ARPA fund, because we kept it separate originally, into the general fund. So it's very important to note. Now we'll come back to that in just a moment. So let's talk a little bit about expenditure. So that's the biggest portion that I want you to take away from this category, because had this not been here, your revenues would actually look less than they are for the projected current year. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about expenditures. Actually, let me go back, because somebody's going to ask me and I'm going to just get ahead of it.
Can you repeat how much was transferred from the ARPA?
I sure can. And I can show you where you can find it as well. But it is $3,471,721. Let me show you. If you go to the comprehensive fund summary, let me see if I can find it, because I have not yet memorized our fund numbers. Oh, yeah, absolutely. You can see, and I don't want to confuse you all, but you can see that this fund 1510 is ARPA, and it has a beginning fund balance of 3.8 million. It isn't all going into the general fund because some of that is being transferred to some of the enterprise accounts for some of those projects. So of that 3.8, 3.4 is going to the general fund. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to go back here. And I have a tendency to talk very fast. So if I need to slow down, because I'm purposefully trying to go very slow, let me know. Okay, so right here, you'll see that we have projected expenditures. The amended budget said we were going to spend 10.6 million on personnel for the current year. We're anticipating we're going to spend 9.9. And this line item right here, this is your cost allocation. This is the concept we just talked about. This is how the agency or the general fund reimburses itself for services. In the past, the city has booked that as a revenue and not technically booked it on the accounting, because that's not what it is, but we booked it like that in the budget book. It's not a revenue. So what it is a reimbursement for expenditures. So upon the recommendation of our financial consultant, in order to appropriately show the true cost of a department, we're now showing those as either negative or positive expenditures. So if a department is going to receive a reimbursement through cost allocation because an enterprise fund is paying for part of that service, you're going to see it as a negative expenditure. If a general fund department owes, so just using planning as an example, if they end up having to pay something, pay cost allocation through the metrics, it's going to show as a positive expenditure. Having said that, what's most important in this whole process is that we anticipated, that we were going to receive 1.3 million, just shy of 1.3 million in reimbursement to the general fund this year. We're now anticipating that we're going to receive somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.6. And that has to do with the fact that now fiscal year 22 is done. So we were using actual numbers, where when we built the budget, it was just an estimate. We're saying that based on the methodology, next year, the general fund should receive almost 1.699 million in reimbursements. So some of you might be looking at the department tabs and say, Michelle, I don't understand why this year a general fund department had X amount of dollars and next year it's grossly different. The story is the methodology changed. That's that plan we just showed you. And at the end of the day, regardless of which general fund departments pay and which general fund departments receive, when you add it all up, the general fund will receive approximately $1.69 million in reimbursed expenditures. So this is also a large portion of, well, this is also a fairly large portion of why this number, which is your annual deficit, is no longer 2.6 million. So if you go through and you look at all these categories, you're going to find that we saved about $665,000 in personnel. That's because it's very difficult for us to recruit. We had a lot of positions that were held vacant for a very long time. We always budget for vacancies, like an individual is going to take full family medical benefits, and sometimes they don't. So that increases. Sometimes you budget for an employee as a classic member and they come in as a pepper member. So that's reducing your retirement contributions. So for that reason, you save $665,000 in this category alone. You also increased your cost allocation revenues or reimbursements.
Give me an example of what, couple of examples of what those would be.
What would be? I'm sorry.
Those indirect allocations.
Yeah, I can show you. Do you mind waiting 2 seconds and I'll show you on the
Good. Thank you.
department tabs? Yeah, no worries. So a couple of other big hitters is that we budgeted about, I don't know how many millions of dollars in professional service contracts. It falls under this operational category, but we saved $555,000 in unpaid professional services, largely due to the fact that we budget for professional services related to capital projects like engineering that sometimes don't happen. And so for that reason, we budgeted like the project was going to happen, but it didn't. So you have a savings there. So Mr. Gornick, you asked me a couple minutes ago, you said we adopted a budget and we took 2.6 million out of our savings to shore up the budget. We thought that was going to be the worst case scenario, but because we were able to get slightly more revenue and we have much fewer expenditures, right? So we thought we were going to have 16 million. We were only anticipating about 14.2. We only need about 465,000 from the general fund reserves. We don't actually take the money from the reserves until the end of the year when we balance the books and we know what we need. So it's not like in your analogy going to the bank and taking the money first, we take it last.
So we give you an overdraft plan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that's what we did. That's what I was asking,
So
in terms of procedurally, because I don't know how the auditors view that, but at least the auditors I've dealt with, you have to show if our boards took action on something like that, fine, we took action on it, but at the end of the day, we still would have to show what we spent and then the rest allocated back into the general fund if it was unspent.
we absolutely do.
Yeah.
So
I see what you're doing.
yeah, and you'll notice that like on the fiscal year 22 budget, we had 0 findings. We put everything where it needed to go in our audit, and we took a deficit that year as well. And so when we do our financial statements at the end of the year, we show them in a much more comprehensive fashion what our actual revenues were and what our actual expenditures were. And when we fall short in the revenue category, we actually show that it's coming out of the reserves. It's coming out of the cash. So luckily, we didn't have to do that in fiscal year 22. I'm anticipating that we will have to do that in 23 to the tune of approximately 465,000. Now, again, these are all just estimates. I've been working on this since January, so some of these numbers could change. Yes, sir.
Well, but we still have that one-time transfer that came in that we can't.
Yeah, so here's what I want to tell you.
Yeah.
If you look at the budget that we adopted last year, we anticipated that by the end of fiscal year 23, your cash balance in the general fund was going to be 5.8 million. But because you had savings, right? This is even before the ARPA transfer, Councilmember Gornick, because you had savings, because we didn't have to take that $2.6 million deficit, we're now anticipating that our fund balance is going to be 8.4 million as of June 30th of 2023, which is in, what is that, like 11 short days? So
Yeah, and all I'm saying is that 8.4 million includes what you didn't spend.
yes, but it does not include the transfer that we've already talked about, which is in the next column.
Okay, good.
So this 8.4 million rolls up to your fund balance beginning for July 1, which is legitimately the very next day. So we take this number and now you back into your new fund balance. So now we can talk about those revenues I already talked about, this 4.5, which is largely the one-time ARPA transfer that we just discussed. And that's why this revenue is elevated. It's real. That money is genuinely there. It just will not happen again. So in fiscal year 25, you will not see that 3.4 million show up there. So you have revenues of 16.4, and now we're anticipating expenditures of 17.7. You can see that there's an increase in personnel. There is an, well, I don't know, there's an increase in capital. So that means that in the general fund, we have a couple capital projects that we're anticipating spending money on next year. We do the sidewalk repair program where we can match people up to $2,500 to replace sidewalks. We have $7,500 in here to do ADA compliance projects. So if there's anything wrong with any of our buildings or our public right of way, that's where that money comes from. The big ticket item I want to discuss with you is this $300,000. This $300,000. So if you'll recall, about 3 years ago, because I remember I was on a Zoom call from my living room, we went to the oversight board for Kings County because the golf fund had to start in fiscal year 21. In fiscal year 2020, begin making payments to the RDA for a loan that was taken out years ago for the second 9 holes on the golf course. It's a $1.5 million loan, approximately. It's a $300,000 payment every year. I was authorized by the oversight board to take a 3-year hiatus on payments of principal and interest in an effort to try to get the city's books better balanced in that time. That 3-year moratorium on payments is up. The golf fund does not have the money to make that payment. You'll see that in a moment. The golf fund is currently carrying a negative cash balance, but the contract or the agreement to take out that loan was between the city and the State Department of Finance. So regardless of what fund you pay it from, it has to be paid. The only option is the general fund. So we have to make a $300,000 payment to the RDA in fiscal year 24. So that's a large part of this $731,000 deficit that you're going to see for fiscal year 24.
Now, is that going to be a payment every year?
For 5 years, yes.
So it's 300,000 on the 1.45 that you
Right.
took out originally.
So what's going to happen is either the night that we adopt this budget, which should be June 27th, unless it gets pushed, or at some point in the beginning of June, I have to bring to you an agreement. It has to be a written agreement between the city of Lemoore and basically itself, the golf fund, that says you're going to let the general fund loan money to the golf fund to make this payment, and it may or may not include interest. And then we have to figure out how to have the golf course make enough money to pay that back. That's the second challenge. But the only way for the general fund to make this payment is for there to be a written agreement between the funds, calling it a short-term loan, to allow that to happen. So It's
you
here.
couldn't pay it off.
If you want me to take $1.5 million out of the general fund reserve, I can pay it off. But that's not my recommendation.
Yeah, I know, but you're gonna have, you're short 4 million. Coming up, you're gonna have to make up another 4 million next year.
Correct.
Well,
Well-
I'm just saying, we just get it off our back, that's all.
Except that you will reduce your general fund reserve or your cash reserve to help support us in future
For 1
years.
year.
Well, you'll basically take that 7.6 million and reduce it by $1.5 million.
No, I'm just talking, I'm just saying, it's a one-time payment, it's off of our back. It makes the golf course.
It really
much more
doesn't.
Equitable.
It really doesn't because the golf course still owes us $700,000.
Well,
It
four,
just-
But it's
well,
just-
yeah, 700 now.
Now, yeah.
It just, all it does is add that golf course. Now it's gonna owe us $1.9 million instead of 1.5 and one.
I'd rather somebody owe us than us owe them.
Except that it's all us.
It's all,
The
Well,
we
general
owe
fund is
ourselves.
still us, but yeah.
But it is a service coming in that we're providing, that's all.
Yeah.
it's an option.
So this transfer, this $25,000 transfer you see here, this is what the city's portion of the LLMD and PFMD general benefit areas are. So there's like the medians that serve everybody. This is the general funds portion of that. So we have expenditures of about a whole bunch of ones and sevens. $17,177,117. And so we're anticipating a deficit next year of 731,000. But to Mr. Gornick's point that he pointed out earlier, let me find my other tab that has all my fancy notes on it. If we didn't make that one-time ARPA transfer, the deficit that we would have brought you wouldn't have been 731,000. It would have been 4.2 million. Now, before everybody panics, we've brought a deficit budget to council every year since I've been here. And we have done a very good job of mitigating the potential, for lack of a better term. We hold positions vacant. We don't buy certain things that we don't need. And so it's never hit as bad as we have projected. However, I just want this council to realize that we have a very lean expenditure budget, and I will show you those graphs in just a minute. Because council does have the option to say, no, Michelle, this is not acceptable or palatable, and this is what I want to see happen instead. But I just want council to understand what happens if we do the instead. This is budget and historical revenues by source. So this is just a cool little graph. And you can see that, like, if I'm at home and I don't really understand how to read a budget, I can go and hover on this and it'll tell me as a citizen, oh, taxes that were budgeted in fiscal year 24 are 8.953 million. And so this is a little bit more interactive than just the paper budget we used to provide in the past. I think the colors are super fancy. Mayor came in the other day with a printed version and I said, you didn't print it in color? How do you know what's happening if you don't see it in color? So this is actually a pretty cool tool for the citizen.
Our printer doesn't have color.
It's because we're on a strict budget. Okay.
I got Sharpies.
Right. Revenues by source. So this tells you that in this particular year, 54% of our revenues is coming from taxes and 27% is coming from transfers. Now, just for food for thought, if there hadn't been the one-time ARPA transfer this year, this number would have been 67 to 69%. On an average year, the city receives 67 to 69% of its revenue from taxes. This is comparable to what used to be the Schedule 1 that would tell the community and council the line item detail of all revenue sources. This is broken up slightly different than how the other one was because the software builds it into categories, but the data is the same. So you can see, for instance, in sales tax that we anticipated that we were going to get 3.238 million, but the newest estimate is showing that we're going to receive 3.374. However, our sales tax consultant is saying we're going to receive 3.32 next year. So this just allows you to kind of come in here and see the breakdown of all of the revenues. And if you scroll down here, I believe to the transfer section, this transfers in is ARPA. And it's slightly different than the number I gave you before, and only for this reason, because council had already approved that ARPA would reimburse the funds for premium pay. And so this is the total of the premium pay reimbursement plus whatever was left in that fund.
3.7.
Yeah,
2.6.
because it's reimbursing us for the premium pay, but basically some of that we're paying out. So it's a net of 3.4 is what we're gonna see into the general fund balance. So you can kind of scroll through here and you can see what makes up this 16,445. This graph here is another little handy dandy tool. So somebody can come in here and they can see, well, how much of the budget is the city manager? How much of the budget is facilities maintenance? And you can kind of just scroll over this and it tells you the historical comparisons by department. So this graph kind of paints a picture for how the city uses its general fund revenues by department. The police department accounts for 58.2% of this recommended or proposed budget for fiscal year 24. Next up is facilities maintenance, and then of course you have fire. So if you combine police and fire, you have about 63% of your budget is going for public safety. And that is not unusual. That's pretty common for what we do every year. Down here, you can see the breakdown per department. I do want to point out a couple things. This non-departmental line item, this is that $300,000 payment for the golf loan. And public safety dispatch, this one's a little bit new. So we're getting ready to implement the dispatch center that many of you know. And we hired a dispatch supervisor this year. And some people might say, well, why did you hire a dispatch supervisor if you don't already have a dispatch building? Well, it's because nobody here has ever operated a dispatch center before. So we knew we were going to need a dispatch supervisor when we went live. And so this person has been brought on to help us stand up the dispatch center. So she has 17 years of experience. Some of you might have seen her profile on the Facebook page that was put out by the police department, but she's helping to interface with the state of California to help us get stood up in order to operate that. We don't typically separate out police department functions and create their own budget unit, but I thought that it would be important for the current year and years moving forward to show the public how much the dispatch center is costing us, especially since there's been so much discussion about personnel. So what you see here in this public safety dispatch is the cost of that particular individual to the general fund. And this will grow as we start hiring more people. Okay.
When do you anticipate hiring?
So we're not certain. Our goal had originally been to go live in January. We do not have dispatchers budgeted in this budget, as you can see, just the supervisor. But we had some discussions with the state of California, and they are now providing us with some equipment when originally they weren't. So we're going to save a little bit of money in that grant fund. However, it's going to take a little bit of time to get that in. As well as some of the network infrastructure that needs to happen. So realistically speaking, probably not until fiscal year 25. But if we're lucky enough to get it done and operational in time, our plan is to come to council and add those people at that time and not wait until July if we don't need to.
And you'll have a source identified for the income?
So that could be a separate study session, but yes, I can show you in this particular document that we're probably going to have about $1.3 million left over in discretionary grant revenue from the state. So if you'll recall, we received $1 million from the feds recently and $2 million from the state. The federal grant revenue was specific to infrastructure. So it had to be used for networks, equipment, things like that. The state's money was much more loosely defined. It was to provide any services to support the dispatch function, which includes staffing. We're going to have about $1.3 million left. And so there is going to be grant revenue there to probably sustain us for the first couple of years, plus the offset in expenditures to the city of Hanford for them to provide dispatch servicing.
So what's the net on that outfit when you got it up?
If I'm rough
What's the
numbers,
cost?
I'm spitballing. So it's going to cost us an additional $300,000 to $400,000 a year.
I'll take the over on that 400,000.
Okay. So 1.3 million should get you about what? 4.3 years.
No.
Okay. This is just another handy dandy graph. This line that goes below the zero, this is how much the general fund is anticipating to receive in cost allocation reimbursement. Don't want to beat that dead horse. Okay. Expenditures by type. The current proposed general fund budget for fiscal year 24 is represented by 64% personnel. And then operational level expenses, which is just about everything else. And you can see that breakdown here. So in total for the general fund, if this budget were to be adopted as drafted, you would be adopting a budget. Sorry, let me just scroll back up to this very lengthy page. You would be adopting a budget that has 16.4 million in revenue, 17.1 in expenditures, with the potential to need $731,000 from our general fund reserves. And if that happened, that would leave your reserve fund balance at the end of fiscal year 24 at 7.68 million. So do I have any questions about the general fund before I move on to the enterprise funds? Okay. I don't want to give you guys too much time. All right, water fund. Same handy dandy graph. Here's a breakdown of the water fund's revenues and expenses by type. And this is really important, I think, for the public to understand that the revenues for the water fund come 99.6% from fees for service. So those bills that we send out for utilities, the proportion that's allowed for water gets applied to the water fund, and then the refuse fund and wastewater alike. Very negligible amounts of money in any of these categories. And it's largely due to things like interest, or if we get like miscellaneous reimbursements from the state for whatever reason. But you can pretty much just bank on all of your revenues that are coming in are from those bills that we send out for utility services. We do not have any more planned increases, for water fund. So you can anticipate that your revenues are going to stay stagnant. Those revenues will increase as we build more developments and we have more connections, but the operational costs will also increase at that time. So it'll have about a net effect. So at this time, you can pretty much guess that you're going to get anywhere from 10.3 to 10.4 in revenues and water fund every year. Yes, sir.
This is more of a historical question, but we have a water fund and we have a wastewater fund.
Correct.
Water's water. What is the right?
No, so water is the potable water that we treat and service for
I know,
your
but I mean,
house.
I know what it is, but are we required to have them, or we just can't have a comprehensive water fund?
Yes, and they're actually oversaw at the state level by different agencies too, and different rules apply. So I don't know if Michelle can explain better, but it's
Probably
for
not.
the service, it's for the service provided that we bill for. So water is separate from wastewater. Those two can't commingle. Employees don't work in both departments type thing. So the costs have to stay separate. So we bill them as separate. They run as their own entities.
They go on the same bill, but when the revenues get collected, they get applied to the correct fund.
Yeah, that's what
Mhm.
we were collecting it all at once, but.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, and that split happens in the background.
Okay,
That people that wrote script that are way smarter than I will
yeah,
ever be.
I'm sure the cities wouldn't do it that way, the state would though. Yeah, right.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Now, how much of this revenue, how can I say this? How much of this revenue that we're projecting is actual revenue and money that possibly is owed to us because of delinquent?
Okay, I will get you delinquent numbers when we come back on June 27th. I apologize. I should have anticipated that. I don't have that number current. This is
I didn't
based
think about
on,
it till right now.
it's okay. These numbers are based on historical collections. So if we didn't see collections that happened, let's say in 2021, then they wouldn't necessarily be reported here because we did historics. However, for this particular year, we really relied very heavily on fiscal year 23. And because we resumed shutoffs, more people are paying their bill now than they had in the previous 3 years. So this is going to be fairly accurate. Now, How many of those connections don't pay? That really just depends on the month. But I can tell you that we are projected to hit 10.4 million this year, and that is with that legitimate revenue, bills that were physically paid.
So where it shows there's a negative total revenue less expenditures, that's a one time,
Where are you?
1
looking?
year at the very bottom on the third column.
The -3.8.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's their anticipated deficit for this year. And I'll get there in just a second, but that's because in the water fund, that's largely because of capital projects. So you can see that at the end of this fiscal year, we're anticipating it ending at 9.89 million in the water fund. It's holding its own okay. But you get over here to fiscal year 24 and this operational cost of 7.6 million that is significantly higher than the current year is because if you looked at the budget from last year, you're never going to be able to draw a direct comparison because it's built so very differently. But in last year's budget, we had separate columns. We had personnel, we had operations, then we had asset replacement, and then we had capital. The way this works, which is really how it should work, is that any capital project that has any expenditures tied to a fund, it rolls those expenditures up into their operational budgets. So when it says operational, that 7.6 million includes engineering of any water related capital projects that we plan to do next year. Now, if those capital projects don't happen or the engineering fees come in less, then that number will obviously drop. But it isn't because we had substantial increases in operations. That's a capital project cost. And you can see that if you look in the back of the budget book, or you go to this capital improvements tab and you start looking at the actual tiles for each of the projects, you can see where that's kind of being assigned. So Mayor Matthews, to answer your question, you have $14 million in expenditures, but that's largely because of capital and one other thing. You see this $2.2 million transfer that's down here at the bottom. So as many of you know, in June of 2021, we had a tragic accident which we refer to as the water incident. There have been a lot of expenditures related to that water incident, some of which we have recuperated based on insurance reimbursements. We're anticipating that after we receive the final reimbursement from the insurance, there's still going to be a negative fund balance of about 2.2 million in the water incident fund. We can't hold negative cash in an incident fund. The water fund is going to be responsible for shoring up that gap. So $2.2 million of this 14 million is to basically pay off the debt of the water incident after we receive all eligible reimbursements. So that is just an estimate. We're still working with our insurance companies. We're still waiting to get checks in the mail. So this number could change.
So what's the debt service there?
The debt services, there are two loans out. One of them is a bond. Actually, it's the 2019 bond. So largely that is the payment for our $30 million bond that we passed in 2019. And then before that, there was a solar project loan that we took out to put all of the solar panels around the city. We make a payment on that loan as well. So the water fund pays both of those loan and bond payments.
So what does water have to do with solar, Bob?
You know, that's a good question. I wasn't here then.
Oh, it pays for
So-
the pump.
I'm just gonna say
Helps pay
that's
for
just
the
because how we
pumps.
always did it. I can look into that and get back
No,
to
it's
you.
because they're stationed out and they were specifically put out like the North Well Field to power the wells and top set power.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That's why they're at our well site.
Good to me.
Yeah, I like that answer. Okay,
No, that's,
So-
hang
so-
on that.
There's not, is there an anticipated negative balance going forward, or is this a one? That's what I was trying to ask, if this is like a 1 year thing or
okay. So
potentially.
we do our best to balance the enterprise funds to the best of our abilities. But I will be honest and tell you that without increased revenue, you are going to see that capital projects will have to cease at some point in the future, whenever that is. That's a problem because you have to be able to do maintenance and you have to be able to expand your services for future growth. So the immediate answer to your question is no, I don't anticipate there being a huge negative every year. But at some point, that's going to mean reducing capital projects in order to ensure that we bring a balanced budget in the enterprise fund. Did you have another question?
Yeah,
Mr. Orr?
that 2.234 million for
Mhm.
transfer that's from the water incident. we're still actively trying to recoup.
Yes, and that's
So-
why I don't know if this number is gonna be, we might receive more in reimbursements from the insurance than they are predicting right now.
That's just, if we don't get no more money or no more nothing,
If we don't get any more money than we've already been told we're gonna get, then this is gonna be the number.
Cool.
So
cross our fingers.
they would have a $3.8 million deficit, which would leave their fund balance at 6 million at the conclusion of fiscal year 24.
Operationally, though, they have a mechanism to handle some of that, though.
Yes. This fund summary is a little different than some of the others because what most people don't realize is that the 3 individuals that are assigned to the utility billing office, so the clerks that collect the payments, they're assigned to the utility department, and the utility department lives in the water fund. Now, the water fund receives some reimbursement from the refuse and the wastewater funds to account for the time that they spend collecting payments for the other funds' services. But this tells you, yes, sir.
I'm glad you brought that up about the individuals working there. We had entered into the software
Mhm.
package so that we could eliminate the special word. You got to go to pay your water bill. We can get a lot of stuff done online for our citizens with this.
Yeah, and we're working on that. So it's a very difficult process. We've started the UB transition, like the
Nothing you
utility.
can't handle.
Well, I'm not sure about that. It depends on the day. But we started the utility billing implementation back in February. I think all my months are running together. We anticipate going live with the new utility billing platform on the city side. Don't get too excited. By the end of the calendar year. There is going to be a citizen self-service portal that will be available to the citizens once we get the entire software implemented, which is about another 2 years out. That is going, I know, don't hate me. But someday when I have time, I'm going to think real hard about how to implement portions of it and not the whole thing at once. And that's going to allow citizens to see their usage. It's going to allow them to pay their bills online. It's going to let them see what they've registered for at the recreation center. It's going to let them basically create a citizen portal where they can see all of their city activity in one place. And we are getting there, but the other modules have to come first because right now there's nothing to tie back to.
Okay.
2 years.
Okay, so you're going to ask me, somebody's going to ask me about this negative $100 right here. And they're like, how does the utility office make more money than it spends? It doesn't. That's because when we did cost allocation assessments for fiscal year 23, fiscal year 22 wasn't over. So if you'll see now that we can actually do the projections after they receive their allocation, they're going to spend about $154,000. And next year they're going to spend about $456,000. And that's just because so much of the work that they do is for water, and water has a larger proportionate share of the expenditures. So therefore they receive less of an allocation.
So can I ask a question on that there? So if you go to the water area, so projected is 7.8 million for next year, 13.7. That's like a increase of 5 million, right? So where did that come from?
Oh, that's this number up here. That's your estimated expenditures. My sheet looks different than your sheet, so please bear with me for just a second. Expenditures
Where are you
Right
looking at,
there.
Johnny?
Right there.
He's looking at this number right here, like
Yeah.
where did we get this?
Yes.
This is your water fund expenditures, your water department expenditures. So if up above, when I was scrolling and I said they were gonna have 14.2 million in expenditures, this is just breaking it down for you and showing that 13.7 of that is what the water department and 456 of it is the utility department. So the number didn't change. It just broke down this number up here, this right here.
I think
I think it's quite, no,
I
it's-
think what he's asking is the question that I had asked you, where it's basically doubled. And what you told me was that includes the capital projects.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Sometimes you have to talk slow and ask it 3 times, but then I'll
Also
get it.
filled positions that weren't filled before is included in that as well, correct?
Yes, except the water fund is a little strange in that we did have some of that in the utility office, not so much in the water fund, because last August we outsourced water to an external contract. And so we don't pay salaries and benefits in the water department any longer. We only pay them in utility billing. This is the capital projects.
Okay,
Sorry,
that's okay.
my apologies.
They want to do $13 million on,
No, this is the sum total
Yeah.
of their expenditures,
Okay,
but
yeah,
the
yeah.
increase is largely due to that transfer out and their capital projects. All I'm gonna see tonight is colored pie charts in my sleep. Okay.
I'm gonna
Eh.
see different shades of gray.
So this is an expenditure by expense type. This just shows you that in the water fund, their expenditures are largely operational. And this transfer is because they're making that one-time transfer to the water incident fund to shore up that gap, if that happens. Again, this is just another breakdown of that data. And this is that same $7 million figure we saw above that Mayor Matthews asked about, which is largely the capital projects. Okay, so that's the water fund. Any more questions about the water fund? Moving right along to the wastewater fund. Same thing, like different data, but same concept. So this one we need to talk about just a little bit because the wastewater fund has not seen any increases to rates since 2007. So their revenues are quite stagnant. And the challenge that we have is that we have several very large capital projects that have to happen. Remediation and rebuilds of some lift stations, adding service lines for future subdivision growth. And all of that gets supported, at least in part, to the wastewater fund. We have other funds that we can use for some of this work. So you have capital improvement, development impact fee accounts that you can use for some of these projects. That has all been accounted for. So when you're looking at this wastewater fund budget, you'll see that their revenues are pretty consistent at 3.9 million, but they have just in and of itself, they have 4.6 million in capital projects that need to happen next year. And this isn't all. I think in the next 3 to 4 years, they had about 26 to 27 million in capital projects that they needed to request. The rates for wastewater don't support that. So this is one of those funds, Mayor Matthews, that we could run into that problem you asked us about before, where are we going to see deficit spending in the fund in subsequent years? And the answer to that question is potentially. We are looking at certain grants to help fund some of those projects. We're looking at spending development impact fees in any way we can in order to try to mitigate having to use wastewater funds for those projects. I know the Director of Public Works, Frank Rivera, has been working with the feds on a DSIP grant that would help pay for a lot of these projects, but it requires $1 million investment on the front end just to engineer those projects. And that's part of this $4.6 million. So I don't want to bore everybody in this room with the same spreadsheet that looks just like the others, but with different data. But the reality is it looks like the wastewater fund is going to have about a $492,000 deficit this year. And they're looking at about a $6 million deficit next year, which is about 1.6 times its annual revenue source. So this is definitely a fund we need to watch. We are watching it. And like I said, we're trying to get creative in how we're going to fund some of these projects in the future.
Okay, before you move on, I just
Mhm.
want to know, so the operational cost looks like it's gonna double, and then the capital. So give me some examples of what the capital expenditures are gonna be, please.
Okay, so if you don't mind, can I do that toward the end when I get into
Sure.
the capital projects?
Okay.
I will, however, address this operational issue that you have called out. So you're basically indicating that it's doubling from what we expected or what we took in the budget to
Right.
this year. That goes back to what I was explaining to you earlier, when our old budget book separated out operational costs and capital costs. But now capital expenditures, some of the portion of them lives in the operation, so it rolls up. The difference is this. This $4.6 million that's assigned to capital down here is construction related expenses. The increase to operations here is engineering related expenses. They're related to those same capital projects. It comes out of a different category, but it's for the same project. So it rolls up different than it did in a previous year, which is why it looks different compared to the amended budget.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so these are just the same graphs that you saw for the other funds.
A question on the funds.
Mhm.
So the ending balance on the funds, let's say the negative balance on the funds.
Mhm.
In the one we're just talking about, next year could be $6 million. So all that becomes a responsibility of the general fund.
Yes, unless you find somewhere else to spend it.
Mhm.
So that's why we're looking actively at grants. Nathan's gonna be very upset at me for saying this out loud, but we need to do a rate study for wastewater.
That
we-
was my next question is,
Yeah.
are all of our industrial people paying their fair share?
So on the development impact fee
We
side.
need to look at.
It is broken up by like type, so residential versus commercial, that sort of thing. But for our actual fees for service for even residential, we need to do a fee study, just like we did for refuse. We brought you one last year to increase the rates because, I mean, how many years is that? 16 years? Am I doing my math correctly?
Yeah.
Because we've had a rate increase and certainly the cost to provide that service has increased in that time.
Okay, thanks.
And are we looking at maybe possibly mirroring a rate increase along with some stuff that we have to do to make us legal, not legal, we're legal now, but future things that the government is going to require us to do in the future? Should we-
Like unfunded mandate type things?
Yeah, that's, I
Um,
couldn't think of that word, but yeah.
So typically what the city does is we hire a consultant to help us through that process. And yes, they do look at things. So like one of the best examples I can give you is on the refuse rate study. They also took into account the city's obligation for SB 1383,
Yep.
which is the organic waste management. And so yes, they take into consideration any unfunded mandate that might be coming down that we would have to adhere to, and they try to build that into our rates
Cool.
moving forward.
Great. Not that I want to raise our rates, but
Nobody does. I know. Okay, so let's talk about the refuse fund. And we talked a little bit right now about the fact that we just did a rate study. So you'll see here that their revenues are going to increase slightly. So our rate increase took effect in April. So, right, April? I believe it was April. Might have been April of last year. All my days run together. But we would originally taken a budget of 4.2 million, but we're anticipating getting closer to 4.6. And that's largely because the rate study took effect. And so because our rates increased, we're receiving more revenue. And there's going to be another 1.5% increase during the next fiscal year that's going to result in this number being slightly higher from the previous year as well. Use of money and property is typically, in most cases, it's interest. Miscellaneous revenues. So this is if somebody, I can't even think of a good one for refuse, but we do charge like incidental lock fees. If somebody wants to lock their dumpster, this is where that revenue would go. So we're looking at about 4.7 million. And then expenditures next year of 5 million. And that's because this capital project right here, you'll notice that we had budgeted 1.2 for the current year. That was vehicles, but we were unable to procure the vehicles in the current fiscal year, which is why you only see us anticipating spending 435,000, but we're trying to buy those vehicles next year, which is why you see another $1 million here. There aren't a whole lot of capital projects other than the purchase of vehicles that happen in the refuse fund. Largely, it's just purchase of new vehicles, either street sweepers or front and side loaders for refuse collection. Operational expenditures. So you can see that we had budgeted 2 million. We're only about 2.1. So they're staying pretty consistent. The biggest fluctuation here is our tipping fees with KWRA. So we have a JPA with them. And so we pay them approximately I believe it's like 1.3 or $1.4 million a year in tipping fees. Could be 1.6. And so they have revenues of 4.7, expenditures of 5 million for a negative fund balance next year of 292,000. Now, I do want to point out that when the rate study was built with the anticipation that this fund would buy one vehicle a year. We bought 2 vehicles first year because we were so far behind. So in future years, this $1 million should really only be about 450 to 500,000. And in some cases, we are eligible for grant funding that helps pay for a certain proportionate share of that vehicle. And so that would be offset by your revenues up above, which is actually shown in your transfers. This right here is a reimbursement that we received from the state for a vehicle that we had purchased. So long story short, I don't anticipate seeing negative expenditures or deficits in this fund year over year. It is built to basically sustain itself. Now, having said that, that's status quo services. That's not basically building new subdivisions. It's not adding new routes. It's not giving people weekly pickup. Like anything that we would do like that would definitely result in there being, deficits in the fiscal year. Any questions?
This is probably not the time, but if we went and looked at doing all three cans,
Oh,
and I know it's a can of worms, but do you have
I do not know what that fee would be. I mean, if the council wanted us to investigate something like that, that would basically require contacting the consultant that did the original rate study for us, who has all of the background data, and asking him to do an amendment.
not asking that, just to know if there was a number?
I think
Okay.
That was discussed. You could probably go back to that council meeting. I think somebody might have asked that question.
I'll dig it up.
Thank you, Nathan. And Michelle.
Okay, golf fund. I noticed an error here. So I'm gonna point it out right now.
You get a
So-
mulligan.
What was that?
You get a mulligan.
Oh, perfect. I love it. I'm a terrible golfer. So the
You're not that bad.
thank you. So what isn't shown here, and this is because the account doesn't list in this, it doesn't exist in the software, and that's a Michelle problem to fix, is that $300 loan payment that we're making on the golf fund's behalf.
300,000.
That's what I meant. What do I keep saying? $300?
Wish it was 300.
Wishful thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there needs to be a debt service category here, like you've seen in some of the other funds, that shows that $300,000 payment. So this negative 409 is really negative 709. I will fix that before I bring this budget back to council on the 27th. Now, let's talk about the golf course, the gift that keeps on giving. Okay, so the golf course has had a negative cash balance now for several years. And if you'll recall, about this time, was it last year, Nate? I believe it was, that we leased it.
At least it
It was
took
2
over a
years.
year. 2 years.
Oh,
ago.
2 years ago, you're right.
2 or 3.
We're on our second, we're in our full second year right
We
now.
are. This is going to be the third year. I remember now. So we leased the golf course to Sierra Golf Management, and we have a 15-year lease agreement with them where their lease payment increases year over year for 15 years. This use of money and property is that payment. Now, in fiscal year 23, they're supposed to pay us $25,000. And I don't mean they're not going to, they're going to pay it for us. But the reason why you only see 18,930 here is because in this same category, this is where interest lives. And because there's a negative cash balance in this fund, it earns negative interest. And so their $25,000 payment to us is really only 18,930 because the fund owes for its negative interest. So long story short, if we didn't have that golf loan hanging out there over our heads, we would make enough money in the 15 years to not only dig ourselves out of this hole, but we would have a surplus in the golf fund so that we could do other things on the golf course. But when you add that golf course loan into this equation, rough math through this process, and again, I can come back with more real numbers. At the end of that 15 years, they're still going to hold about a negative $700,000 cash balance in this fund. So on my list of things to do is how to solve this problem. I don't know yet. I just need council to be aware that that is something that's living out there, that we are talking about internally and with our financial consultants to try to figure out how to solve this problem.
Because it looks like we lose about real close to $6,000-7,000 a year in interest. Over 15
Correct.
years is almost $100,000.
If we ever got to positive cash flow, then they would actually start earning interest. But yes, while it remains negative, that is in fact the case. Now, keep in mind, now these payments are going to incrementally increase, and I don't have that in front of me right now, but I think by year 5, we're getting payments that are in the 6 figures. So it will go a long way in the short term to helping make up some of that gap. But as you extrapolate that out over the 15 years, and particularly that 5 years that we owe the loan, this number doesn't get, I mean, it's not going to be 1.9 million in the hole, but it's going to be about $700,000 in the hole.
But we can't, and we couldn't pay that off. Not that we have the money to pay that off.
Yes, you can use general fund revenue to do whatever you want. If this council said, let's use the general fund reserves to pay off the debt and this negative cash balance, you have the authority to tell us to do that, and we will. But that will mean that in a year where you truly have a deficit of 4.2 million, right? Because ARPA is going to go, that ARPA transfer is going to disappear at some point. You're going to leave yourself with a fund balance that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 million, and you're only going to be able to cover yourself for 1 year. So when
I like the way you talk.
you do,
I do. That's good thinking.
okay. So that's not my recommendation at the
I know,
current
that's what I
moment,
said, I like the way you talk.
but
That's not mine either. I was
that's
just,
an option. So yes, when you ask, can you? Yes, you can.
Okay. Not
Okay,
asking.
any other questions about the golf funds?
Yeah, somebody ring the name.
I got what?
Connie Wilson's right.
Oh, Miss Clerk, do you want to read? Does somebody have a question for me?
Public questions right now.
Or do you want to wait? I'm sorry, I tried to take over. I'm not in
Is it
charge.
better for you to get questions as we go from the public or?
It depends on
at
if
the
she's
end?
gonna want me to go backward.
Can we ask her? Let's ask her what she wants.
Connie, what is your question pertaining to? Is it the golf fund specifically? Is she muted? Okay,
Do you mind if I keep going in the interim?
sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
Hang on. Okay. forgot.
So the last fund summary that we have to evaluate is the fleet fund. Now, the fleet fund is a little different than anything else we've talked about so far in that it's an internal services fund. And they, in essence, should be a net neutral department in that they only charge for the services they provide to provide fleet maintenance for all of the other departments. And we do a monthly allocation that is pretty exact. So we take overhead costs, we take costs of supplies, and we apply it to the specific department that needed that service. Budgeting for this internal services fund gets slightly more complicated because I don't know how many vehicles are going to break down. I don't know what level of service is going to be required or how often we're going to have to outsource a repair. And so the fleet department kind of takes their best guess based on like historical data. You'll see here though, that the revenues are slightly higher than the expenditures. And the reason for that is because we have an hourly charge, $88 an hour to perform the service. And for a long time, prior to my time here, the fleet department under old management wasn't really charging the departments for all of the services and supplies that were being provided. They weren't good at using the tools that they had to make sure they were billing for 100% of their costs. So what happened over time is it ended up in the same position that the golf fund ended up in, where it's holding a negative cash balance. So basically the general fund had been supplementing the fleet fund to make sure that all the bills got paid. So when we went back years ago, when we kind of unwound that, we found that they had a negative cash balance. So the fleet fund does a really good job now of being entirely accurate. And because we charge $88 an hour, it's only slightly more than it actually costs us to actually provide the fee. So we're able to chew through this negative cash balance. We are going to continue to do that until this negative cash balance goes away. At the time that they're net neutral, at the time that they're zero, then we're going to reevaluate our fees for service internally and only begin charging what is necessary to support the service. But we can't continue to hold the negative cash balance indefinitely, so we have to chew through that deficit, basically. And so that's what we're doing. So that's why you see that this increase, the revenue is slightly higher than the expenditure.
so do we purchase all our vehicles?
Not any longer. a couple years ago, Nathan came to council. We now have started leasing some of them. And those lease programs through Enterprise also include certain maintenance is done by Enterprise that we no longer do in-house. It's also helping us to turn our fleets over a lot sooner. So our maintenance costs are coming down. We're not seeing a whole lot of that yet because during COVID, it was so hard to get vehicles that even when we asked for them, they couldn't provide them. And so now we're finally getting to the point where they're giving us vehicles. And so hopefully in the next year or two, we'll see a lot of those costs come down. However, a lot of these expenditures for fleet are heavily borne by the refuse department. I don't know if I even have that on here. And their vehicles, we can't lease through Enterprise. They don't have trash trucks. So we will always continue to provide that service in-house.
Sure.
So that's the last of the fund summaries. This is basically the nuts and bolts of the budget we're asking you to adopt. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Garza, you wanted to see the capital improvement projects, right? Okay. So it used to be that in the budget, you would get a 2-page Excel spreadsheet, basically summarize projects and balances, right? This,
Do you know what page that is off the top of your head?
no, it's on the last clicky tab on the digital budget book.
It's
157, I think. Maybe, no.
Yeah, where are you? 153.
One
Yeah, there we
fifty-three.
go. Close.
So one of the things I love about this particular software is that it makes the capital budget requests so much nicer. And when somebody gets online, whoever you are, and you're looking at this budget through this software, I'm going to tell you that this particular budget as presented is about 75% as good as it could be. And as we start getting better at using it, and as we start having more historical data, and as we get to the point where staff knows what our chart of accounts really is, because this year our staff didn't know our new chart of accounts. And so they didn't put in any of their requests. We did it all for them. Then these requests are going to get much nicer. So this page right here just says that there's 15.6 million in capital requests in the current budget. And it breaks it down for you by department and by basically revenue source. And then it breaks it down for you a little bit further by department request. It gives you the name. Now, please do not fault any of these departments for the lack of detail in these project tiles, because that's a Michelle Spear thing. This is all I knew about their project requests. And because I entered them on their behalf, this is as good as it got. But when a department comes in the future and wants to submit a capital project request, they can put as much detail as they want. Welcome, Councilmember Lyons. So, this basically tells you that of that 15.6 million, 1.4 million of this is related to fire requests. And it goes through all the lists. Now, when you get past this, oh, is this all it tells you?
Yep.
Yeah, you have to go to the appendix.
Yeah, where's the appendix?
157.
It doesn't, oh, you have to print the appendix.
Oh.
Click on what thing?
So,
Oh, I'm sorry. Miss Champion just told me how to solve this problem. Look, you click on a project. Oh, this is fabulous. See, I told you, I'm still learning how to do this. So this tells you more specifically about this project. And what this tells you is that to date, that is your fiscal year 23 anticipated expenditure, what we're anticipating the spend to be in fiscal year 24. And then down here, it breaks it down for you. And it says that this blue line is how much is going to be in construction, 100,000, and 10,000 of this is going to be in the engineering costs associated with that particular project. And then it does it for all of them. And it tells you that a special fund is paying for 100% of the project. And what that means is likely a development impact fund or some sort of grant that's coming. Actually, grant's its own fund. This is probably a development impact fee. So that's how you read these tiles. And because I just learned this, I'm going to show you one more time. If you want to know a very specific thing, you click on the name and it pulls it up. Did you have a specific question on a specific project?
I would,
That's good.
Uh,
I can't remember.
I don't think she's opened it to the public yet, Mr. Reed. But I'm not in charge.
We're almost there.
I'm good.
And one of the things I thought that, I guess I was expecting more projects on here, you know, that we might, you know, things that we talked about in terms of strategic planning and things like that, that we would begin to focus on.
There were more projects on this list.
Okay.
The reason they came off is because what I saw historically is a ton of capital projects, particularly in the Public Works Department. But they're only able to get a certain number done a year. And that's either due to revenue streams or staffing resources, whatever the case may be. And what happens is when you budget for all of the things they hope they can get done, it shows a fund balance that isn't entirely accurate. Because if you don't actually get those projects done, then you don't actually spend the money.
Yeah.
So we had directors take a really hard look at their requests and only include those projects they genuinely thought they were going to be able to complete in fiscal year 24.
Okay.
So that's why this is
I have
different.
no problem with that. I was just thinking in terms of, you know, we've talked about a lot of things, you know, our wish book of things that we downtown, more parking, you know, things of that nature. At some point, it'd be nice even to use this as a tool to come up with, you know, that wish list, so that if we ever wanted to explore additional revenue, we would have something that we could show.
And there are tools on this software to allow us to do things like that, scenarios, like we can build multi-year plans. It's just quite honestly with the implementation and changing chart of accounts and moving systems,
Yeah,
like we
I
just
got
didn't have the time
got it,
to,
yeah.
that's what I mean. I mean, this thing can be
You do a lot.
infinitely helpful. Yes,
Good.
we're just not quite there yet.
Good.
So, I am actually done with my budget review. So, Mayor, you can open it up for public comment, or you can ask questions, whatever you'd like.
We'll go ahead and open up for public comment and then we'll come back to council.
Yeah, a couple questions.
If we can have Connie unmute since she waited so patiently. Miss Willis. She able to unmute? Go ahead and work on getting unmute, Miss Willis, and for now we'll have public comment in chambers. If anybody has public comment. Oh. Beautiful. Mr. Walker?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. And before I begin, just let me commend Miss Spear for her diligence and thoroughness. She actually answered a lot of my questions, and the first to admit I am not as experienced as you in this, so I just cannot thank you enough for the work that you put into this in your presentation. With that said, I did have a couple clarifying questions I wanted to review, given to what we're saying. I did notice that in each fund that we review, we are running a deficit. And later in the presentation, you mentioned that this is built to be sustainable. At what point? At some point?
Depends on the fund. but
Depends
yeah.
on the fund. And then with that, I wanted to ask, is there a fund that we can prioritize to make solvent? Like, what would be your recommendation on that?
So that's not really, that's like asking me which one of my kids I like. The reality is they all need to be shored up and they all need to be solvent. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously the bulk of what we do as an organization lives in the general fund. I mean, you can see that just by the magnitude of that fund in particular. That one worries me the most. But it worries me for different reasons. That's where your public safety lives, right? And so if we don't shore up that gap, then there's likely going to be there are going to be some pains felt in the realm of public safety. However, in order to increase revenues to the city, you have to see growth. We can't grow if we can't put infrastructure in to do that. So they really all go hand in hand. And how you mitigate those challenges is different depending on the fund. So it's going to have to take a lot of comprehensive conversations, not just between internal staff, but with council and the public as well.
I would highly encourage a study session or like a meeting just about that, because similar to my previous question, like I know this might sound a little obvious because I think bankruptcy is like the biggest answer, but like what happens if we do not close that gap? Like, and what's the timeline of events and course of action? Because you did mention earlier, mitigating efforts such as not filling vacancies. And then like probably a cut of services. So what could the public expect if we don't close these gaps within the foreseeable future?
I'm gonna let the city manager take this one after I answer the second part of your question, because I want the public to understand that, we've brought deficit budgets every year. But in the background, we have been making small changes to try to shore up the gap. We virtually don't do training of staff anymore unless it's mandated by the state. And we hold positions vacant. You could probably look at a neighboring agency of similar size. I'll use Selma, for example, and look at the number of FTE they have, their full-time equivalents. We're drastically under them with the same population. We have many, many people wearing multiple hats. I mean, you can look at my title, like it doesn't even fit in a cell. And so many of us are doing the work of 2 and even 3 people to try to help shore up this gap. We're out of those type of options. Like we've already cut the low hanging fruit. So as far as what happens next, I'll go ahead and let the city manager answer the question about what we hope to do about that, or one of the options.
So staff will be bringing a study session more than likely in August to
Excellent.
discuss some of these options.
And if some of my questions are probably for like a later date, just please let me know, and that's an acceptable answer. And I greatly appreciate that. And then with that said, like, I know this is kind of a strange question, like how should citizens in this room be feeling about our financial health? Are we being cautious? Are we being concerned? Like, where are we in terms of like, because you mentioned that we've been bringing deficit budgets before. And I know like it looks scary to see the negative numbers, but you've outlined very clearly in your presentation that this is not only doable, but we're making progress.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that we bring deficit budgets because it's legitimate. If what we anticipate is going to happen happens, there will be a deficit spend. But you can go back and look at the audits from 3 previous years, and it's never been as bad as our worst case scenario budget, right? So we're evaluating it as we move through the year constantly. We're weighing the benefit of spending money versus not spending the money. There's a risk benefit analysis that has to be done there. Should citizens be concerned? No, I think they should be educated. I think they should be cognizant, and I think that they should trust the fact that their administrators and their electeds are very aware of the problem. You can go back to a budget, I believe it was in 2015, might have been 2016, and it looked like the budget was balanced, but that's because whoever built the budget that year, that was before my time, omitted certain payments for risk management insurance. That was over $1 million. You add that to the budget and it doesn't look as good as it did on paper. So this looks scary, but it's because every dollar and every cent is accounted for. Like there's nothing missing from this budget.
And then I want to try to ask this correctly. So if I I'm misunderstanding the issue, please correct me. Is part of this due to COVID? Like, have we seen an impact? Because you mentioned in the past, like we've had some budgetary issues, but like, and we've also received reimbursements. Like, what is?
I would say COVID impacted your enterprise funds the most because there were so many people that didn't pay their utility bills during that time. And obviously that's a detriment, right? So those funds didn't receive those revenues. Did COVID affect the general fund? Yes. But that's not why we have this problem. The cost of doing business rises every year. Like you could look at the national rate of inflation and see that this has been a trend. This is a trend, right? And it's gotten so much worse in the last 12 to 15 months. So we're aware of the situation, but in its simplest form, the only way to balance a budget is to either increase revenues or decrease expenditures, right? It's simple addition and subtraction. And there's only certain legal mechanisms to increase your revenues, right? You either bring in business, which we're trying, but I think most people understand that bringing in new businesses is a 2 to 5 year endeavor. It's not like you talk to somebody and then next year you have revenues in.
Yeah.
And like I said, we've reduced expenditures to basically its bare bones. And so there are only a few options left on the table.
And it costs money to bring those in too.
Yeah, it does. And that's the infrastructure cost that we've been talking about. You know, if you want to bring in new development, you have to have a way to provide them the infrastructure to do so.
And then just a few more specific questions, and I appreciate your patience and time. You mentioned earlier about using ARPA, And I just wanted to clarify, so if this budget were to be approved as presented today, we would we would be utilizing all the remaining ARPA funds.
Sure, because because otherwise you would have had a $4.2 million deficit, and now you're gonna have a $731,000 deficit. So
Okay.
yes, effectively, it's gone after fiscal year 24.
Gotcha. And then how do we compare to other towns of similar size when it comes to like the department allocation, such as police? You mentioned that it's normal for our community.
I don't know.
Okay.
I've had enough time to evaluate our community, not enough time to evaluate those around me.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And probably my final question tonight, because I do want to respect the time of the council and the audience. We kind of alluded to long-term measures and strategies we can implement to create a more resilient economy in Lemoore, and that those take time and money. Beyond taxes and fees, like what other tools do we have to generate revenue?
The only real other revenue that we get is by means of grants, but what people need to understand is there is a cost to receiving a grant, in time and energy and management and monitoring of that grant. And a lot of them also have fund matches, so it's not always 100% of whatever it is you're asking for. We are trying to utilize grants more often, but it's not always a dollar for dollar savings.
Thank you, Ms. Spear. Again, I cannot thank you enough for your intelligence, your prowess, and just everything that you presented tonight. And thank you, Madam Mayor. I yield back to the floor.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. Ms. Spears, thank you. The presentation was great. First, I would like to say signing up for this web service is super easy. I did it like sitting in the chair over here.
Sir, could you state your,
Oh, Christopher Bright, sorry.
thank you.
So if you're using the app on your phone, instead of hovering, you have to tap. I just want people to know that in case they have a device that doesn't have a mouse. But then my questions, we're discussing the new payable bills for water, sewage, that sort of stuff. What about auto pay? I know especially for the service members that get deployed or get sent wherever, auto pay would be a great benefit.
So unfortunately, the software that we're implementing does not provide that ACH service where it's a direct like draft from your account for whatever the bill value is. That will not be supported by the new software.
Okay. And then on the water fund, the expenditures doubled by about $7 million. And you said a lot of that was the capital projects, but the capital projects for the water fund only showed about a $3 million set of projects.
Let me pull my tile for that. Give me just a second.
And then while you're looking for that, just a point of the refuse capital project, the new truck didn't carry over onto the 1-year plan. Just if you want to make a note of that.
Oh, I do want to make a note of that. You'll have to forgive me because this is all new to me too, so my sheets don't look like they used to.
No, I understand.
I will come back to council on the 27th and give you a very specific breakdown of what that increase is in water. Only because I have about 150 line items here, and I'm not going to be able to evaluate it from the dais and give you an accurate answer. I can tell you that 1.7 million of that increase is the completion of the TTHM project.
Okay.
In and of itself, which I'm not sure if that rolled up onto the capital sheets or not. We moved about $75,000 into that budget in order to make sure that we can repair and repaint water tanks, which didn't used to show there. So that's some of that increase, but I will, there's a $745,000 expenditure for Bryan Hall. That's when our TTHM project goes live. We're going to have to haul off the waste product. And so that's in this year's budget. So let me go ahead and I will do an evaluation and I will bring that back on the 27th or provide it to the clerk to post.
Okay, I appreciate it. I definitely don't want people's time being wasted while trying to dig through line items.
And while I'm
Um,
trying to do manual mathematics.
Yes,
I
yes,
live by
ma'am.
Excel.
That's it. Thank you for,
You're welcome.
I yield back, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Any other public comment in chambers?
Connie, she was a message that said that she had no questions, she was just amazed by the new computer program.
Anyone else in chambers? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and go to Ms. Elise.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. I'm so just, I just want to echo previous people speaking because every time I thought of a question, like either someone on the council asked it or someone in the audience asked it. So I just wanted to say, good job, Michelle. Like, I know it's a lot of
Thank you,
information.
Jennifer.
And I'm like, it's a big project and it's just it's so cool to see just how detailed it is and how well you're able to explain it, to have people answer it, and then to have it not just be glossed over, like the council totally gets it. And I just have a lot of respect for that, everybody's asking the right questions. We're all on the same page. And I just want to echo that, like, I'm ready to pay more for my wastewater bill. So when you guys want to work on that, I know the wastewater bill hasn't been increased in over a decade. And so I want to make sure that, our city is solvent and I'm doing my part, but thank you and have a good evening.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Going once. Going twice.
So
Back to council. Any questions?
I like the software. I like it. I don't like all the numbers that are in it, but
Right.
I like the software. And one thing I just learned just now, that our very expensive system is not going to be able to do auto pay. Can we talk to them and find out if there's a module? Because I too agree that our servicemen and women, there's a lot of people that use auto pay. I think I wouldn't have a car in my driveway if I didn't have auto pay. So
I can certainly reach out to them. I mean, like I said, this is a years-long endeavor to implement this,
Yes.
and they're constantly doing upgrades to their system and its capabilities. And I'm more than happy to have that conversation and see if they're working on something in the background or if it's something they could work on in the background.
Because that
We're
would be
certainly not
huge
the
for-
only customer that uses this particular platform, and so I will definitely mention it to them.
it'd be huge for us. Thank you.
No worries.
It does, how about like, oh my gosh, business licenses
Yeah, that's gonna be tied into the new software.
And-
I don't know what,
for auto pay also on something like that though.
mean,
I will ask. Right now, I can't do auto pay at all, but if I'm gonna
Yeah,
ask
no,
a
I
question, I'll ask you for
understand.
everything.
And I also want to say, sorry for being late, everybody. The wheels literally fell off at work. I just want to say thank you to you. You do an excellent job.
Thank
You really do.
Michelle, one of the things I would like to see, at least you or the city manager present to us, at least on a quarterly basis. I think one of the frustrations like for this year is, we found out about the budget in May, that we might have a significant deficit, and we got like 2 weeks to think about it. Okay, we actually have more, but.
Right.
Yeah.
And
But I quarterly, we don't need to do it. I don't need to do it, whatever you prefer, but I mean, and not necessarily in this detail, but just the highlights in terms of where we're at in expenditures, revenue.
And I can certainly prioritize that for you. I know I've promised that every year and I'm not making excuses, but the software that we currently operate in does not make that easy. Like there's no projections, like it's all manual mathematics to come up with that data. I think once we switch to Munis, which is the new platform, that's going to get much easier. It's a lot more intuitive and things tie back more readily. So yes, I will definitely make that a priority moving forward.
Good.
Any other questions from council right now? I know I don't have a lot of questions, just, I got this on Thursday and life kind of happened this weekend, so I didn't have a whole lot of time to dig into it, but I'll definitely contact you this week if I have any questions.
Okay.
And I want to thank you for all the work put into this, and I agree it's an adjustment because, it's really hard to compare with previous years, obviously. So it's just trying to get all that worked out.
But that will get better.
Yeah.
It's just we're changing chart of accounts. They're not line by line anymore, line for line anymore. So as we have more years in the system, there will be more years to compare. There are a lot more tools in here. We can create charts that map out 10 years of history once we have 10 years of history in there. We just have to get it in there first.
All great stuff. I just wish it would help me this year.
Just one more comment, if I know what it takes to go through an update on the system, so not only to you, but your staff as well, in terms of their office, pulling all that stuff together, that's great.
Like if I can toot their horn for just a second, thank you for opening that door. I don't do this by myself. I couldn't. I would have quit 4 years ago. We have an amazing staff. And I know I said earlier that so many people are doing multiple jobs, but I want to shout out Amanda Champion. She builds this budget with me, about 90% of it, her and I. She and I both have our quote unquote real jobs to do. It's a lot of time and energy on the weekends and after hours and time away from our family to get this done because we just don't have the staff to do it. I think she and I almost quit together last week and walked out in a form of solidarity, but we saved each other and we're here. So I appreciate your comments. It is a lot of work, and I couldn't do it without our finance staff and everybody else in this city that helps put this stuff together, but she deserves a special thank you.
Yeah, well, congratulations. Good job. The other thing is, I would really like to challenge us this year, city manager, and I'd like to bring back a no deficit budget. I mean,
In 24?
yeah, I mean, come on, let's go for the big banana here. I mean, let's not get complacent, always bringing a deficit budget back.
Can I ask
just a
a
challenge out there,
Can I
just a
ask a
challenge.
clarifying question.
Just where it says zero, that's it.
Right, but not
Sure.
for 24. You mean for like 25?
No, for 24. This is a preliminary budget. You're so far, you said to me or to us that you're only 446,000 off. I mean,
700,
This year.
700.
700.
or excuse me,
31,000. So let me ask this question.
No, I don't want to get into negotiating with you. Just
No,
see if
no,
can do
are
it.
you
I'm not-
expecting me to bring a zero to you on June 27th? That's what I
whenever
need to
we're
know.
Gonna approve it. I mean, we can always extend the approval.
So we can do it, but I would
See,
need
there you go.
council's, okay, but
You're not gonna.
we would need council's consensus, and I don't know if now's the time to say it, but you're not gonna like how we have to do that.
Well, that's why I'd like to see some of the options, we didn't talk about that.
Okay,
What it would look like.
I can bring you
I don't
options
know,
on the
I'm just talking about
27th.
myself. You guys might say, great, here's another 2 million, let's roll it again, I don't know.
I think trying to bring that on the 27th is not adequate time.
Correct.
And I think it's putting the cart before the horse because we do have some sessions planned to go through council and get the public involved on how to shore this up. But it won't happen before we approve this year's budget.
We can
That's my
always
2 cents.
push out a resolution, approval at a later date.
You would have to adopt a resolution on the 27th that is a continuing budget resolution that would authorize wages to be paid
Got to-
starting in July. Well, I'm not saying that for your benefit. I'm saying it for the benefit of everyone here. Like, we have to have a budget, so there would have to be a resolution adopted that allows us to pay wages, and then everything else would basically suspend until the budget is adopted.
Do I need direction from council?
I like to look at it. I'll be the bad guy. I like to look at it, what Frank said. I'd like to look. And we just got to do what we're gonna have to do. I'd like to look at it. I don't know if you need a second or you just need
Just direction.
direction. You need a
Consensus.
majority.
Yes.
Since we've gone a little bit of another direction, I do see that there is a public comment in the audience, so I'd like to open that back up.
Thank you, Mayor. Tom Reed, Lemoore. I would recommend that we continue with the budget process the way we've done it in the past. It is a short time frame. I would hate for us to get into the arena of the federal government where they always have a continuing resolution and never have a budget. So I do recommend that we continue with the current budget with no, even though it will be over and not a zero. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity to be recognized, Madam Mayor. I would also echo the comments of Mr. Reed, and also as a point of clarification, if we were to do such a thing, such as extending the passage of the budget, my concern, to my understanding of how ARPA funds work, is it wouldn't be obligated for the budget, and then that could potentially lead us to not being even able to have that money. If I'm understanding, I don't know if that's correct, but
We've already received the money. It's already been accounted for as revenue loss per the final rule. All we're simply doing in this budget is moving it from essentially one bucket to the other, consistent with its use.
okay.
So we wouldn't lose the ARPA funds by doing that now.
Okay, that was an area of concern of doing so, but I do think it is valuable information to look at that. But I do, if my understanding is also correct, we could do that after it's passed if we wanted to revise it or like look at it for a future year. But I would recommend sticking to the current budget. That would be what I think would be best due to the time constraints and the urgency.
Yeah, council has the right to amend the budget at any time through budget amendments. So if we adopted this budget and they wanted to look at options after the fact, then certainly we could look at it at that time,
Thank you.
if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
So if I can add then, what's the difference?
The difference is really timing.
Mhm.
And having a budget that allows us to do more than just pay for salaries and benefits on July 1. It also allows the city manager to come forward with his study session on an item that he wants to bring forward on how to shore up the gap, not just for the current year, but for future years as well. That will provide for more public input. And I don't want to speak too freely, so city manager, please don't be mad, but I would certainly hate for people to lose their positions in the city before other options have been evaluated. And you've seen that the general fund budget is over 60% personnel. So doing the math, that's largely where your expenditure savings is going to have to come from.
I think if I could, I may be out of line, but if I get what my fellow council members are saying is they're not saying they want to know what it looks like. Like what would the effect be? Not so much to say that, yes, we want to make this happen and this is what direction we're giving you. It's just what it would look like.
Okay, and that's fair. We just won't be able to adopt by July 1st if we do that, because I don't have enough time to build those scenarios to come back to council in that time frame. So you will likely not be adopting until probably August if we do that process.
But nobody would lose their jobs in that time frame.
No, but we would not be able to do really anything other than pay wages. So your capital projects would be on hold and certain bills won't get paid while we're waiting for
Not if
that
it's a
process.
continuing resolution.
It depends on how specific your continuing
Oh, yeah, I
resolution
was just
is.
gonna say, we're
Correct.
not talking about laying anybody off.
No,
We're
no,
not talking
you,
about not paying bills.
right.
We're just looking at options. That's all I'm talking about. And
I mean, it could be as simple as it's $700,000. Could be as simple as, hey, we're not gonna do X.
It's not
And-
gonna be simple.
No. In the capital improvement aspect, it could be.
You don't have $700,000 of capital improvements in your general fund.
If it was
But-
that simple, she would have brought that.
I know.
And,
Yes,
and listen, I appreciate what the both of you are saying. I really do. And I've also learned to support staff and to.
But we're not
I
supporting
understand.
staff.
I'm not saying that you're not.
No, but make it very clear, we're not supporting staff. I've spent hours looking over this. I'm not supporting staff.
Well, yeah, I agree with you and I understand. And I've spent years looking over this. And what I'm trying to say is that whatever she brings us, I'm really inclined to follow that. I really am. Because I've known no one better at it. I've seen a lot of people a lot worse at it. And I'm gonna sit here and say, good job, and continue to do what you do. And in the middle of this consensus that we were trying to get, I just wanted to know that I was against it. Unfortunately, I was not gonna give consensus on that. I don't know why we kind of got away from it. Kind of feels like we kind of should have moved forward with consensus or not. That's where I stand.
But I also want to make it very clear, it's not that.
No, I understand.
It's, if you look at these numbers, in 3 years, 4 years, we're bankrupt.
I get it.
I know you get it.
Mhm.
I have a fiduciary, we have a fiduciary responsibility. Just look at, she does too, we all do. We're not questioning nobody. Just it's a hard pill to swallow in
I
a
understand.
time frame. And that's all. I'm not saying that we need to stop anything. I'm not saying we need to I'm just saying that this is a very, 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 very important thing that we have to look at. That's all I'm saying.
Without a doubt, agreed.
And I think she did an awesome job. I love it. It's not the work they didn't do, it's the money that just is not there.
Yeah, and you can't get blood out of the turnip.
Mhm.
So we need to find a new turnip or the next best thing, or to move in that direction.
I agree, but it's still. I don't know.
Yeah, and one thing that she said that, I mean, I'm not going against you, when you said we already cut the low hanging fruit, we haven't cut low hanging fruit, we just haven't regrown it. It's nothing's been cut as far as the way I see things. When you say cut low hanging fruit, I think of you let go of people that we've had to let go of.
What I mean by that is, the budget development is a process.
Yeah.
Right? And it starts in January with departments requesting their budgets. We do all of the salary and benefit analysis for them, but they bring us their requests for operational expenditures, capital projects, et cetera. When we first evaluated the revenues against the expenditures, if we had brought it to you at that time, we would have brought you a $6.5 million deficit.
Yes,
So when I say that we cut the low hanging fruit,
I got you, yeah.
I say we cut over $2
Yes.
million of requests out of this budget before it ever got here. That's our job, is to evaluate that. Now, I can recognize and appreciate the request coming from council, and I don't mind doing the work. I just want everybody to understand that that's not going to happen by June 25th.
Yeah, you don't have the time.
So if that's going to be the consensus from council, then we can absolutely do that. It's going to make this process look different than it has in the past.
I think what I'm saying is I'd like the process to be different than it has in the past. I don't want to be presented with deficit budgets all the time. I'd like to be involved in the process earlier, at least on a quarterly basis. So we see where we stand with respect to the budget. Okay. As we move forward.
Yeah, I understand that, but with the way things currently are, even when we find out the budget, which we just actually got numbers that we could bring, if I would have used the first numbers Michelle gave me, we'd have been looking at over 6 million. So we don't have that look throughout the year, which is what she tried to explain earlier. So
No, what I understood her to
so
say
when
is-
I first talked to you guys a few weeks ago about the budget, that's kind of the first time we got a real good look at it. And Michelle, I respect everything she does. She's good at what she does, and her team is awesome. I'll take them every day and twice on Sunday. No city has benefited more than the work that we get out of Michelle and her people, period. So I didn't have a lot of those numbers for you guys. And Michelle does not like me going out with numbers to council that may or change or may not change. So until she feels pretty comfortable, I don't go undercut. Because if I tell you guys it's X and then it changes by significant, typical council seem to only remember that first number I give them.
Yeah.
So it's the timing isn't ideal, but we're working with lack of manpower and antiquated systems to the max. And I kind of feel a little ambushed here tonight because everybody on this council knows that we are very adept to the budget shortfall. I've met with every one of you individually. I've explained to you some of the things we want to do. And we also talked about having study sessions after the fact of this. So I just want it to be known that we are very well aware and we do have a plan in place to come forward. Wasn't quite ready to talk about that this evening, but you guys kind of forced it. So I'm just going to leave it at that. We will bring next on the 27th. I'll bring a budget approval first. If it doesn't pass, I'll bring a continuing resolution to keep funding going into the next fiscal year. And then we'll let play out with the budgets. But I will have some definite answers for you on the 27th how we can shore the budget. But I guarantee you, it is not in the best interest of the city or the residents of the city, what we'll be bringing at all.
Why not? Why not? I mean.
Because it has to do directly to public safety. And I'll leave it at that for now because we're getting the cart above the horse because we're not allowing ourselves to be able to put together the proper presentation or the right verbiages or have the right statistics and the numbers behind
Why
this.
don't we just do a study session?
And we are, and I already told council we'd be
No,
doing that in July or August.
about some of the things that would go even further. I mean, let's just say, for example, we don't get, our state doesn't reimburse us at the rate we're supposed to get on some things. We're sitting with a make-believe budget up there anyway, okay? We don't know what's gonna happen. But let's just say that $4 million that we had from the feds doesn't materialize in this budget.
Which 4 million?
The one that the ARPA money.
That's
We
already
already-
received.
yeah.
It's in the
already
bank. It's
received.
it's here.
It's
That's a
tangible.
one-time. So
One time.
but let's say we get a reduction in state revenues. Okay,
We're speaking in
Or-
hypotheticals.
yeah. hypothetical. My point is, what would we do next?
Yeah, but is
And I
there any
think-
state revenues in this budget?
Okay, so
No.
if I may, I think I understand what you're saying, and I think you and Nathan are saying the same thing. It's just how we want to get there is different.
Yeah. so-
And and I'll speak for myself, what I would like to see happen is that we adopt the budget as drafted so that we can continue with these important projects that we have listed and move forward, knowing that after the budget is adopted, we'll spend some time evaluating where we're going to end up in the future and how we're going to mitigate that so that we can bring balanced budgets in the future or make mid-year budget adjustments to try to shore up any gaps that this council would like us to shore up.
Those are all tools that are certainly at our disposal.
And
right?
I would and not that I have an opinion, but if I had one, I would prefer to adopt the budget as drafted and do that after the fact, as not to delay the budget adoption process. Recognizing that I think we're all on the same team. We all want the same thing and we have to find a way to solve the problem. I just think that conversation comes after the budget is adopted.
Well, so
There's nothing that says you can't amend it after the fact.
what do you think the reserve, you're gonna request for the allocation amount you want to take out of the reserve?
It's right here. We talked about 731,000. It's this number right here.
31,000.
That's only because of the ARPA one time.
Correct.
That's right.
So we know that in fiscal, and that's what I was,
Well,
last earlier when I was asking 24, are you sure 24? I wasn't trying to be obtuse. Because we know going into 25, if nothing else changes, you're looking at a $4 million deficit. So clearly by this time next year, we have to have a solid plan for how we're going to move forward. And I'm just thinking we have the next couple of months to kind of plan that out after this budget is adopted. And
If we can, yeah, if we can get a plan to do it. I mean, I think that's, at least my preference is, while I'm on this council, I'd like to see no more deficit budgets. If we have to do it this one time for 731, I'm good with that if we don't have any more after that. But that's what I think our goal is for the city.
So how well does your crystal ball work?
it's been broken for quite some time. My crystal ball tells me right now that without a drastic measure, we're looking at a deficit budget next year. And if this council or any council that's seated at that time, and the same is true today, if you told us, which you just did, and you got consensus to bring us a balanced budget, we would. However, operationally, that's the city manager and I work to figure out how that's going to happen, because not every cut is a dollar for dollar savings. And so we have to analyze how to get there. And I think what Nathan's trying to say, because he's trying to be politically correct, and everybody knows I'm real bad at that, is that's going to come on the backs of employees. Because barring some of these capital projects that are in here that aren't that significant in the general fund, that's where you get your dollar for dollar bang. And so it gets a little, what I'm saying is, yes, we can have those conversations. I would just prefer to do it after we adopt the budget so that we're not in a time crunch and we can bring you comprehensive strategies moving forward, and not just for this 731,000, but for the future 4 million that we're talking about next year.
Well, just to be clear, so everybody knows, since we're, I don't think that we've shorted the employees of this city at all. I think this council, we provided above the inflation index compensation this year. and we put that into the salary schedule. Okay. You know, I guess I could say, I won't say it, but I think we've compensated the citizens, the citizens of the city have compensated the employees well this year. Okay. I don't think we've asked to not hire people. So, you know, when you bring up that it's going to come out of the employees, I don't know if it is. We don't know. I mean, you're right. That's the easiest place to go because it's the largest number. But I don't know unless we talk about it and look at what are some of the other things that we need. And then also we need to talk about other sources of revenue. I mean, the citizens need to know that there's some real shortcomings here as well.
Right, no, and I
And I don't know why would we be afraid to talk about that? You know, in terms of what we need, what the city needs to grow.
And
So-
I'm not disagreeing with you. I think it's just a timing conversation is what I'm trying to
I
get at.
agree with you. Yeah, I don't like having to make last minute decisions. We had to make a last minute decision on the 10% salary increase too. You know, it was brought to us at one meeting, study session, and next meeting it was implemented. I don't like that.
Yeah, I know. And
You
you let
talk
me
about
know,
ambush. I don't like being ambushed either.
you let me know that in my office too.
Okay.
But I will say, since I've been here since 15, the councils previously have not given any raises to its employees. Any raise that was given to an employee was in, I think, 16 or 18 on a rate study that they implemented and across the board cost of living because we were so far behind everybody. And that still didn't catch us up. And that 10% did the same thing. So if we go just operationally and you tell us to bring you a balanced budget, there is no money in this when you're bringing negative budgets year over year to say, oh, let's give the employees 3%, 4%, 5%. It's never been granted or given since 2015. The only time the employees of the city received anything was through COLA. And I would do the 10% again, even knowing where we're at now, because we had all these vacancies that we couldn't fill and people are getting burned out and tired. And since we've done the 10%, we're still not with other cities and we're fine. Our employees aren't complaining anymore about that though. Morale is pretty good overall because the majority of our employees aren't. You feel it in like the maintenance division, right? Them guys are understaffed. They're trying to do road repairs, potholes, crack fill, striping, things like that, but they've only got a few bodies to try to make the work go around. We're charging more money now for rentals, yet we don't have the park staff or the people in parks to run park routes 7 days a week and keep bathrooms clean. When as soon as we can clean them, people are trashing them, smearing feces on the walls, peeing on the floors, ripping sinks off their pedestals. That is not something that happens once a month. It happens weekly, multiple times, but nobody sees that or knows that. And I don't like to go arguing that. We fight certain people in our community nonstop, especially when it comes to like restrooms and keeping our facilities nice. We don't have the money to go out and get those extra bodies. And nobody right now is complaining that they're not compensated fairly. But we were absolutely struggling to maintain organizational integrity because we had so many positions that we couldn't even get people to apply for. Once we did the 10% COLA last go round, that significantly changed the rank and file and the levels and the maintenance jobs and the water, wastewater jobs. Refuse especially, we couldn't fill our refuse positions. Now we're finally getting back to staff. So I understand where you're coming from, but I would do it again. It was the right thing to do for the people or for our employees. And a couple other things too. When you talk about budgets, the city used to have a Chevy dealership, a used car dealership, an RV dealership, a boat dealership, a motorcycle dealership. All those things went away during like the 08, 9, 10 years. Kmart, all those things went away. They've never come back. They've never come back. $3.3 million in sales tax revenue. That's all the city gets. That's not enough to sustain services. It just isn't. And we've been fighting this for years. We went after a sales tax revenue pre-COVID. So, and we got 47 or 48% of the vote with a not a very good campaign, short notice, because we were trying to figure out what are we going to do to shore this budget? What are we going to do? Well, then COVID happened and we actually fared pretty good during COVID on some of the things. And this ARPA injection is the only thing that's keeping us solvent for another year. But we've talked about this every year at budget time. We've talked about the fact that we have been on deficits. Like, you know, we're bringing in businesses, but it takes a while. I would have fully thought Helena would have been up and running this last fiscal year. They're just now pulling permits. They're behind schedule. We got some things coming in, but we have 0 big box stores to anchor this community. I recently went and visited one of a smaller town in Fresno County, and we were driving around and I'm like, how do you do it? Like the roads, things look good. How do you do it? We were sitting in front of a Walmart and he pointed there. He goes, that Walmart pays all our bills. Period. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have anything. We had an opportunity to get a Walmart many years ago and we opted not to do it. So, I mean, we're dealing with legacy issues and, but I'll put the staff up against anybody in this city and this council, and myself are damn lucky to have the people we have.
I just want to address the ambush comment. I wasn't ambushing anybody. I was just asking for clarification between an amendment and a resolution. Okay, so
No, you're
okay.
And I wasn't trying to ambush nobody either. I was just trying to, look, everything has to be on the table and I just want everything on the table. I want everything on the table, look at all options because I'm nervous. I'm very, 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 very nervous moving forward for the 113 employees we have and all of us. I'm very nervous. And that's all it is. I'm not trying to ambush you, Nathan. This is rough for all of us, but 5 of us signed up for this and I wasn't trying to ambush nobody. This is nervous. And fiducially responsible is what we all are. So and I'm not saying that you guys are doing anything fiducially unresponsible.
I don't take, just so you know, I do not take personal offense to your requests. You have a right to have the data. So does the public. I'm happy to bring it to you. I just need you all to know that that is a lot of work. And we are in the middle of implementing new technology starting July 1. And in fairness to Gornick's request and Mr. Orthew as well, that's just not going to happen by July 1, which is why I wanted to recommend we adopt the budget as drafted, because I feel this as viscerally as the rest of you, right? And somebody said, like, there shouldn't be feelings involved. It's just numbers. And that's true until you realize what the effect could be when push comes to shove. So I take this as seriously as everybody else, and I don't mind doing the work. I would just prefer to see the budget adopted and let us do the work on the back end because we have enough money to support us going into the next fiscal year. And I understand Mr. Gornick and Mr. Orthier's concerns, and I'm happy to present those options to you. I have zero issue with that. I just want to do it and I want to do it well. And I don't think I'm going to be able to do that timely in a way that's going to allow this city to continue to move forward appropriately. I think we need a budget adopted to do that. But certainly I'm not opposed to doing the work, and we can bring you options. I would just like to see that happen after and not before the budget is adopted.
If I can ask again, resolutions, you said, Dr. Gornick, you said that it depends what the language is on there also. Is that kind of what a resolution is too? Because I know you're saying
As
we
far as
can
the
only pay
resolution
our
for
employees, right?
payments
But
for
we can't pay anything else.
No, my understanding is the resolution can be crafted in such a way that you pay specific things, like you're going to pay bills for critical service. So as an example, you're going to continue to pay SUSP for your water services. But I guess my argument is if we're going to get so prescriptive in our resolution that we say we're also going to continue recreation services, then you might as well just adopt the budget and let us move forward, and we can figure out how to shore up this gap later. Because if we're going to line item this resolution to pick and choose what we think is important, I think you're going to find that $17.1 million of this is important, and we might as well adopt it and find a long-term solution after the fact.
And so if I can, my follow-up is the amendment. So how are we held accountable, or do we have to do an amendment, and how soon can we do one? Or like, let's just say we adopt the, hypothetically again, if we adopt the budget and we say, okay, we're going to do we want the information, and then we can come back in August or whenever we get the information, do an amendment?
We do budget amendments throughout the year. So anytime that we need to shift or move money or add an expenditure or increase a revenue, we come to council and do that anyway. My point was that, let's just say that we bring a recommendation to council to shore up this budget. And let's just say, I'm just going to use this as an example. We're deciding not to buy any police vehicles this year. As long as that contract hasn't been issued and that hasn't been done, then council has the right to say, we're not going to do that. And we remove that from the budget. I'm thinking more long-term because we're pretty good every year at shoring up the gap internally throughout the year, right? Like we've never seen a deficit hit as strongly as we budget for. If we know going into next year that council's consensus is going to be bring us a balanced budget, then I say, let us work through this year to figure out ways to bring you a balanced budget next year. $731,000 is a lot of money. 4.2 million is a heck of a lot more. And so, I'd like to be able to spend the time to evaluate those options moving forward. But if the money hasn't been spent, council always has the option to tell us not to spend it.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question. So if we approve the budget, so if we don't approve the budget and we do a resolution, you're saying that we could have those answers by August. If we approve the budget, when would we expect to have those answers by? Is that going to be 6 months down the road or a year down the road?
I think it depends on what kind of options council's asking me for. If you want to know,
Let me just interject here. Why don't we, in the interest of time, and we have another meeting after this, why don't we go ahead and think about the next meeting, which is a week, really. Yeah,
Next Tuesday.
Yeah, which is a week, which also shortens things up. Let's go ahead and adopt the budget as presented with the 700 and some thousand.
That's
Okay.
not,
That would be next week.
that's next week. That's
That's
not here.
next week. Yeah.
That's not here.
No, I realize.
no, that's what
Okay.
he means. He means on the 27th.
On the 27th, but let's have a study session, Nathan. Soon after, within the month, sometime in July, that we can talk about the kinds of not only just savings, but also the kinds of capital improvements we want to see in the city. It's not all about cutting.
Right. No,
It's
I
also
understand.
about growing. And so you said there were a whole bunch of capital projects that were left off that you didn't put them all in there. I'd like to see all those, and let's have those in the study session, talk about and come up with a dollar amount, what that is. Go from there.
So is there consensus of council then to bring back the budget as presented by Michelle with the direction to then soon after have a workshop to talk about the options and then
Reductions as
subsequent,
well as additions to the city.
exactly, with subsequent budget amendments as necessary or subsequent contractual obligations to grow? Is there consensus among council for that, for the 27th? Mr. Gornick? Oh, go ahead,
I
Mayor.
would give consensus to that if you also add a resolution just on the agenda, just in case, so that we're covered, just in case.
Yeah.
Whatever that might look like. Me personally.
So then at the next meeting, the budget will be on for approval. You'll have a continuing budget resolution that will follow in case the budget doesn't pass. And I just want to point out one thing that Michelle was talking about. So if it depends on how detailed you want that resolution, you're in essence creating a budget with that resolution.
Right.
So if what you're doing is just trying to buy yourself a little bit of time to make payroll, we can do that resolution, but I can't read your minds. I don't know how much detail you want in that resolution. We can, of course, revise it at the meeting, but just so you're aware that could take some time. And again, you're building a budget. So just want to put that out there. We'll bring both.
Sounds good.
Okay, looks like I saw a lot of heads nodding yes. Okay.
Agreed. Okay, moving on to public comment. Public comment will be in accordance with the attached policy.
No.
Can we take maybe a 5-minute recess to use the restroom?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How about 10?
Oh.
I don't, rather not.
Are we on recess?
Yes, break.
Stop.
No, not yet.
Yeah.
No, no, no. And
Clock, Marissa.
That clock's not gonna stop me. No, just kidding. Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. Good evening. I want to take a moment to really emphasize the effort and care of everyone in our city. Not only of yourselves, I just wanted to really extend my appreciation because in all my interactions with the city council members and the city staff and those who make the things happen, who make the sausage, who grind the gears, you guys are very communicative and available to the public. And I really, truly appreciate that. So I wanted to thank you for your continued support, your continued investment in our community, and your continued patience and effort to communicate with the public. In addition to that, there are some things I wanted to mention at the previous study session that I forgot to do so please forgive me. I wanted to really advocate in the future, and in addition to probably in the executive summary section of the budget, to really, in addition to talking about the methodology, maybe having some of those special key comments that Ms. Spear was presenting, such as in regards to ARPA. So people who don't have the time to go through the 230 pages of the budget can really just kind of like get a gist of like, hey, this is what's really different about this year's budget compared to last year's budget. That would be something I would advocate for. In addition to that, I would, for future public study sessions regarding budgets, I would like to, I think it's really helpful that we have a glossary with the budget, maybe having like a workshop and like helpful tools for the public who maybe, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, and then just like really just kind of like promote budget literacy and those issues for the community. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was just really expressing my appreciation to everyone and overall just great job tonight. Thank you.
I just want to say, when you print out the budget, there's a glossary in the back.
Yes,
Okay,
that's what I'm referring to.
gotcha. Any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on. No ceremonial presentations. There was no comment online, correct, Marissa? Sorry. I'm trying to hurry for Councilmember Lyons. No ceremonial presentations, department city manager reports.
So good evening, Mayor and council members. I'll just kind of run through the list to help save us some time. But well 11, the pH dosing and the swabbing's all complete on that well. That's the one on the north part of town on 18th and Glendale. They start hydraulic jetting today. They'll be pumping water to the canal for probably the next 2 days, and then we'll start the process of getting well 11 back online and do the testing to get the state to allow us to send it forth into the distribution system. Well 13 out by the college abruptly failed last week. The pump and bowls were pulled. They did the video inspection, but we don't have the results of those findings yet. So construction on 13's well underway as well. Well number 4 out the north well field has some electrical issues, so we're planning a turn off, turn on to replace a main breaker out there. So that's being taken care of. And then the Cimarron sewer lift station rehab, that's the coating's been completed. They're finally working through that. That's one of the projects that they had for CIP this year. So they're trying like heck. It should be finished up here in the next couple of days.
How about the seepage on, was it 4? There was some seepage or?
Yeah, we're doing okay. The river's down. It's flowing. We're not seeing any additional damage out there or any additional water from what we saw. It's still wet out there, but it's maintaining. And what gives us a benefit there is just to the south of us is an orchard, and they have some drain tile and pumps that are running. So that helps keep our well field
good
out of water. And then that's kind of a good segue into the next point. We met with Public Works and some of our management analysts met with FEMA and Cal OES last week. And we kind of went over our spend of preparing for this potential disaster and the work we did. So we're working with them for potential reimbursements of the money we put out for sandbagging and berming and protecting critical infrastructure. So that meeting took place. The same meeting is also taking place with mosquito abatement. Sit on that. The mosquito abatement's looking for additional funding with the county passing some of their emergency resolutions helps open up some funding because the pesticides and the amount to treat for mosquitoes this year is going to be substantially increased due to all the water, a lot of aerial applications where they'll be using crop dusters to spray. But you know, where trap counts already are up in the thousands, which normally they're not that way for, you know, down the road, but it's not just constant, it's like everywhere. So it's going to be a bad mosquito year. But they're working towards that. Michelle mentioned grants earlier. The DSIP grant is moving forward. We've got our letter of recommendation from the Captain O'Sullivan out at the base last week. So that's moving forward. That could be potentially up to $9 million worth of funding for new infrastructure to help support the Lacey Ranch project north of town. And that's the nexus to the military is military housing and good living for our military folks. So that one's going on. We're also submitted a SEDS grant through the EDC that goes national for well 15 to finish that well on the south side of town. And then we're also running an ELA grant for some water infrastructure money. So we have 3 grants active right now that we're currently working on for water and wastewater infrastructures. And then the last thing is Councilmember Gornick had requested to put my performance on closed session. So I'm just looking for consensus of council and we'll do that. Well, we can do it next meeting or we can do it on the July 18th regular meeting.
Whatever you want.
I just need consensus. Yeah.
Want to do it in July?
Yeah.
That sounds
Next
good.
meeting's probably gonna be.
All right. So July.
July.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Got it. That's all I have. Thank you.
That ELA grant for infrastructure, what was that for? Water, wastewater?
Water.
Water,
Water.
sorry, thank you.
Yeah, we tried to submit an ELA grant for extending the natural gas lines out to the Kings Industrial Park out by Leprino there. Because we have Helena coming in, potentially another company buying off another 35 acres over there. But the way it works, if we don't own the infrastructure, we can't apply for the grant. So we had to backpedal off that. So we moved over to water to get some submittals in to help support all the growth south of town. And with some of the rezoning there, we're going to some more light industrial out there. So that water's critical to provide good drinking water for not only the public, good pressures, but also fire suppression for the growth going on out there. So hopefully one of them will hit. Thank you.
That's it for all of the reports?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you, sir. Consent calendar, items considered routine in nature are placed on the consent calendar. They will be considered and voted upon in one vote as one item unless a council member or member of the public requests individual consideration. 4-1, approval minutes, regular meeting, May 16th, 2023. 4-2, approval, second reading, ordinance 2023-02. Adopting zoning map amendment number 2023-01, change a portion of the zoning map from mixed use to regional commercial and light industrial located at the northeast corner of 19th Avenue and Iona Avenue in the city of Lemoore. 4-3, approval appointment of Lemoore Parks and Recreation Commissioner. 4-4, approval facility rental fee reduction for the Kings County Elections Office for the 2024 election cycle. Would anybody from council like to pull any of those items?
Can I just have a question about one of we talked about the low income housing apartment project
Mhm.
and then doing something with that adjacent property to the east, in terms
Yes.
is that,
That's not on here.
That's
at
not
all
on
yet.
here.
No,
Okay.
no, that's I think we're talking
because they weren't we talking about doing some zoning there too, changing that zoning?
we are, but
Yeah.
that'll be coming to council at a future
Okay,
meeting.
all right, that's good, that's good,
In fact, I think we're gonna bring it in a study session before we bring it to a vote,
gotcha.
right?
Does
Right,
any-
Steve? Yep, he's shaking his head. Yes, I got that right.
Anyone from public want to pull any of the consent items? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion.
Second,
Got a motion by Councilmember Lyons, a second by Councilmember Gornick. Councilmember Lyons,
Yes.
Councilmember Gornick,
yes.
Councilmember Garza,
Yes.
Councilmember Orth,
Yes.
and I vote yes. And I'll try to talk a little bit slower.
Did you know that?
What?
I'll be quiet.
Okay,
Johnny did that, not Stewart.
No, that was me.
Oh, was it? Oh, okay.
moving on, public hearing. 5-1, public hearing, resolution 2023-16, ordering annexation and inclusion of additional territories, tract 820 in Public Facilities Maintenance District Number 1 in the city of Lemoore, and confirming the diagram and assessment of annual levy for fiscal year 2023-2024 for an additional territory annexed to and included to Public Facilities Maintenance District Number 1. With that, I will open the public hearing. Right? No idea, sorry.
Yeah, so Randon will give us a report and then if you'd like, you can open the public hearing
Okay,
and then
sorry,
Marissa
Randon.
will read to you the votes.
Go for it.
So 5-1 is the annexation of track 820. That is the GJ Garner development over by the golf course. So this report, as I believe we brought it last meeting, is just going over the annual assessment to maintain the roads and the landscaping around that district. And it is a assessment that is done through the property tax for those items. Was there any questions on that by council? I know we kind of talked about it last meeting.
Nope.
Okay.
So now I will open the public hearing. Marissa?
Good evening. I did receive one ballot from the property owner and they voted in favor of the annexation.
Thank you. Any discussion from council? Any other public comment?
Don't do it.
All right, we'll close public comment or public hearing, sorry. And bring it back to council.
So moved.
There, I have a motion by Councilmember Gornick,
Second.
second by Orth. Councilmember Gornick,
Aye.
Councilmember Orth,
Yes.
Councilmember Garza,
Yes.
Councilmember Lyon.
Yes.
And I vote yes. 5-2, public hearing resolution 2023-17, ordering annexation and inclusion of the additional territories tract 848 in Public Facilities Maintenance District Number 1 in the city of Lemoore, and confirming the diagram and assessment of annual levy for the fiscal year 2023-2024 for an additional territory annexed to and included to Public Facilities Maintenance District Number 1. Mr. Reader.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this is for the Lennar over by West Hills. It is exactly the same as the prior public hearing and the last council meeting that we discussed it at. So this is a much larger zone. So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge it in case you guys see the differences. This zone would be, charged more money. But this is going to be streets landscaping for that district. Any questions for this zone?
Yeah, does that include the highway going in to the development from
It depends on which
On
point
Bush
you're
Street.
asking about.
It'll be just adjacent to the properties, not anything in between
who handles all going into the Bush Street?
the city,
It's general fund.
general fund.
Okay, we should have included all that in there.
I don't know if we can. I think that's our portion that we pay in for the public benefit to everybody. So typically on the LMDs and PFMDs, it's the area where the houses are at and then the roads inside. And I think you can get the circumference roads.
Traffic impact fees as well, help maintain.
But we can't, yeah.
Traffic impact fees are gonna help pay for the roundabouts.
Because it's the
Yeah.
widening of that road, that's the issue, because it was already paid for once when we put the college in. So that's why the poles are all the way back to accommodate for a wider street.
Yeah, so that would have been one of when council previously approved the apartment complex that would just be north of Bush and east of the treatment plant or the water storage there. That was one of the things they were putting in. They were supposed to widen that road to 4 lanes. That was on the developer. So as we develop, we'll put some of that on the developer, and then we use impact fees because there's multiple roundabouts going in this year out there to help accommodate traffic.
Any other questions from council? We'll go ahead and open the public hearing.
Good evening. I did receive 2 ballots, and both were in favor of the annexation.
Thank you. Is there
And
any?
just real quick for the record, those 2 ballots are all the property owners out there, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Any public comment? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Gornick, second by Orth. Councilmember Gornick,
Aye.
Councilmember Orth,
Aye.
Councilmember Lyons,
Yes.
Councilmember Garza,
Yes.
and I vote yes. And also close the public hearing. I think I forgot to do that. New business. 6-1, approval resolution 2023-18, establishing thresholds and implementation guidelines for evaluating vehicle miles traveled in the preparation of California Environmental Quality Act (CEQA) documents for when the city of Lemoore acts as lead agency. Mr. Brandt.
Good evening, Mayor and council members, Steve Grant, City Planner. Bringing this to you tonight for your approval to what we're asking you to do is adopt a new procedure for the way that we evaluate traffic in our CEQA documents. This is something that was given to us by the state. State adopted a law a few years ago. It's called SB 743 that requires that instead of evaluating traffic based on level of service, or LOS, if you've heard of that acronym, which measures the congestion of a street or an intersection, that instead we're to measure it based on the total amount of vehicle miles that a proposed project or development is expected to generate. So in order to do that, we have to figure out, well, where is the threshold? Like what, because in CEQA, you always are asking the question, is this a significant effect? I mean, most projects do have some environmental effects, but the question is it a significant effect that you have to mitigate? And so the question then becomes, well, how many vehicle miles traveled is a significant effect? And the state put out their guidelines that were statewide guidelines and were very general and had a very low threshold in most cities' opinions. And so what cities have been doing is adopting their own guidelines, which they are allowed to do under state law. And so we have hired a firm, LSA, who's done this type of work in a number of cities, including Hanford and Visalia over the past few years, to adopt our own thresholds. We needed to have this type of study so that our procedures are legally defensible, since CEQA documents are often challenged when there's controversial projects. So I wanted to introduce Ambarish Mukherjee, who's with LSA, who's going to give you a short presentation on just describing the process that we're going to go through. But just to summarize it, what I would say from a commentary is what he's come up with in terms of a process is going to make things better for Lemoore than what we would do if we had to follow the state's thresholds. So introduce Ambarish.
Thank you, Steve. Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, council members. Myself, Ambarish Mukherjee. I'm a principal at LSA and traffic engineer, and I've been working with many communities in the Central Valley since SB 743, Senate Bill 743 came into existence, that was almost 10 years ago. In fact, yesterday was the 10-year anniversary. I don't know if it's something to be celebrated, but the bill became law in July of 2020, which is 3 years ago. What that does, and can you pull up this? Oh, sure. So if you can see the presentation on your screen, I kind of just have a brief overview. Like I said, July 1st, 2020 was when it went into effect. It replaces delay-based traffic impact analysis, which is LOS. Instead, it's looking at VMT, vehicle miles traveled. Simply put, what is VMT? It's the amount of trips generated by the project. Let's say a home typically would generate 10 trips on a daily basis, right? Times the distance that that traffic is going, whether it's 10 miles or 15 miles. So for one home, if it's on an average traveling 10 miles, it's 100 miles of VMT that it's generating, right? So that's the concept of VMT. And next slide, please. What I'll do is quickly go over a few key concepts and how your guidelines have been customized to suit your community. That was the biggest challenge. If we were to stay with the state guidance, it's very general, it's very stringent on the thresholds, and it's not region specific or geography specific. So the goal of these guidelines, and I had a wonderful time working with Christy and Steve, trying to understand Lemoore as a community and how we can make these guidelines more appropriate and effective for projects coming into the city. One of the things that this bill has done, and without getting into the political side of things, it is actually anti-development for a lot of communities, especially suburban and rural communities. It's trying to promote high-density, transit-oriented developments in large urban communities, but it kind of takes away that ability in other communities through this bill, right? And then you have the CEQA statutes that you have to follow when a project is coming in. That project has to follow the CEQA statutes. Otherwise, it becomes pretty complex. If a project is not able to clear all the environmental effects, it leads into a very long drawn process of what we typically know as an EIR, environmental impact report. So all that kind of complexes the process of a project development or entitlement process, right? So the concepts that I'm going to talk about here are primarily because I want to show you how by adopting these guidelines, you are differing away or staying away from what the state had mandated and making it more Lemoore specific. So next slide, please. So one of the first things that when we talk about VMT, because we are talking of how far these trips are going, so we have to know what the region is, right? Because where are these trips going? And so that becomes the region for which we actually would develop a threshold. Like in LOS world, I'll draw that analogy. In LOS, we would say anything that's a LOS E or F is heavily congested, right? So that is something which is not acceptable. Similarly, in VMT, there has to be a threshold. So the threshold, to develop that threshold, you have to first define a region. You say, okay, in this region, people generally travel 10 miles. So any project that comes in and that travels longer than that 10 miles has an impact. So that's why you have to first define the region before you can get into the threshold. So the region, which what we found is the county for you guys. It is 95% of traffic from Lemoore actually either stays within the city or just stays within the county. So majority of your traffic is just staying within the county. So it is safe to say that Kings County should be the region. And that's the substantial evidence that you can use in your CEQA documents using this simple graph that we created out of the regional travel demand model. Next slide, please. This one is very important, the VMT screening criteria. This is where we are showing with substantial evidence in these guidelines how several of them, these criteria are deviating away from what the state has stated in their statewide guidance. And this would actually help streamline a lot of those small to medium-sized projects within the community. Streamline means streamlined in the CEQA process. So they don't have to really get into EIRs for every single project. There are several of them. The first one I graded out because it's not applicable to Lemoore right now. It's still there in your guidelines, maybe 10, 15, 20 years down the line. If you have some kind of a transit service here, you may be able to use that. So we didn't take it away. But for now, you don't have a high quality transit in Lemoore. So it's not going to be applicable right away, but it's still there in your guidelines. Local serving retail, less than 50,000 square feet. That's easy to understand. Any local shopping center neighborhood that serves the local community, which is less than 50,000 square feet, could be screened out. That would help typically a lot of these smaller projects like gas stations, travel centers, fast food places, QSRs, quality service restaurants and things like that. Affordable housing, if you have one, you can screen it out. The next one is actually important. A project that's consistent with the city's general plan and having less than 1,000 daily trips. That's like almost 100 homes. So if you have a track map project coming in with 100 homes, you can screen it out if it's consistent with the general plan. What the state's guidance say is 11 homes. And there is substantial evidence explaining how it's not like we just came up randomly with this number. There is evidence in the guidelines that show why you can use it. We made it a little more stringent for projects that are not consistent with the general plan, because when you typically have a GPA or a zone change, you require a little more CEQA analysis for those projects. So we brought it down to 500 daily trips. That's also with the explanation is there in the guidelines, but I'm just mentioning it. Again, institutional, government uses, public uses, parks, fire stations, police stations, things like that, schools, those are all exempt. None of these are mentioned in the state guidelines though. And we have explained how you can exempt these projects. Exempt means I'm just saying in the CEQA process, it will go through the rest of your entitlement, but just the CEQA EIR is not required. So that's what I mean by exempt. And that low VMT area, this one it's very important because this is something we have created a tool for. I don't know if I will be able to show that today. I mean, it's there. I mean, there's the link to it. Oh, actually, the link I think is to the bottom, isn't it? There's a tool there which shows which parts of the city are low VMT areas. One is there for residential, and then there is one for non-residential projects. That's a tool that the city can use and developers can use also if they want to figure out, oh, I'm going to build a project in this part of town. Is that project going to have a VMT impact or not? Just by looking at the tool will give you that. And it's an online tool. It's hosted on our server, so the city, anybody can use it basically. It looks like a map, but it's interactive. It's just like you're looking at Google Maps or Google Earth. It's very similar. Next slide, please. This is the one I was talking about, the screening threshold using daily trips. So this gives you a little bit of idea of what size of projects could be exempted. Like I said, 1,000 daily trips is 106 dwelling units, right? For single family homes and so on and so forth for different types of projects that you can exempt from VMT. Next slide. This is the screening tool. It's a snapshot of the tool. It like those green zones. The zones, let me just quickly mention, those are basically what in the modeling world, we call traffic modeling world, we call TAZs or traffic analysis zones. This is taken from the KCAG model, Kings County model. And then we created this tool for you using the Kings County model. If you zoom in further in this tool, you can actually get into parcel level details also. But it's just like how you use Google Earth. I mean, scroll in, scroll out, zoom in, zoom out, and you click on anything, you see that pop-up window comes up and gives you all the detail of that parcel or that zone. Next slide, please. Transportation project. This is more for the city to use, public works, because when you're implementing any transportation projects, capital improvement projects like roadway widening, this is another thing that's actually impacted through 743, because roadway widening projects that previously would relieve congestion now are significant impacts. So if you're widening roadways, it's actually a significant impact. So that's a challenge now in under SB 743. But that's more for the city, not for developers to deal with. If you're coming up with projects where, let's say you're widening a roadway for 2 miles, now you have to probably prepare an EIR for that kind of a project. There are ways around. There are ways around it. I'm talking to many cities, creative ways. For example, what if we have that roadway through a general plan EIR, and then you kind of tear off from the EIR when you're going into individual projects. I can't say for sure whether that process would work, but people are trying to be creative, just know, so that every single roadway widening project don't have to prepare EIRs for their studies. Next slide, please. I think that was it, right? These are the project types and metrics, so we can skip this slide, that's fine. That's the VMT analysis. If somebody is actually working on the project, which is not screened out, what they need to do is they have to use the regional travel demand model and prepare the analysis. So that's what this slide says. And mitigations, this is the biggest challenge for VMT mitigations, because most of the VMT mitigations are behavioral in nature. Why do I say that? Because your mitigations would say you add bike lanes, you add sidewalks, you add transit facilities, carpools, van pools. Adding bike lanes or sidewalks doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to use that or do that, right? In LOS, if I put in a traffic signal, I would know exactly the improvement's effect, right? How it would relieve congestion. So that has been the challenge in the VMT world, is the mitigations themselves, which is why I was saying, if a project has a significant impact and you know that the project would be receiving scrutiny under CEQA, do I really apply some mitigations which are questionable and say that the project will not have a significant impact after applying mitigation? So that's where the challenge is. So when you have a significant impact under VMT, most projects under CEQA are saying, okay, this is a significant impact which you cannot actually override, mitigate. So that's the problem with mitigations under VMT, that which is why I was saying it's better if we can either screen out the project at the very beginning and not have to go through all this whole entire VMT analysis process. So that's all I had to present today, but I'm here, and Steve, you feel free to jump in if you have any questions. I know it's a little technical, but it is affecting a lot of development projects throughout the state. And, we talk about revenue, we talk about finances, but you need development to happen. And this is actually hurting a lot of the, I've been working with several, MPOs and cities up and down Central Valley, from Sacramento down to Bakersfield. So I've been seeing how it's affecting development negatively. So that's my 2 cents.
Question.
Yeah, sure.
Are you saying this process would increase our chances of getting funding for some of these projects, like for safety or?
So are you talking of development projects or capital projects?
Capital project. So
for capital projects, if it is a safety related project, yes, if you apply for that kind of fund, it increases chances of that receiving that type of fund. But if you're talking of a capital project, which is purely a roadway widening type project, it will be more and more difficult to receive funding for those types of projects. In fact, I've been in contact with Caltrans, district headquarters in Sacramento. They have clearly stated in their last bulletin that Caltrans is moving away from roadway widening projects statewide. They're going to focus on transit projects and active transportation projects. So that's been a complete change in Caltrans's approach.
Oh, that wouldn't help us then.
No, but if you are looking at, there is a project in Hanford. I was recently talking to staff at Hanford. They're planning about a road diet project. It's in the very early stages. They're talking of a road diet project, and they're trying to apply for a grant funding for that. So they may be able to get something, but it's like they're going to reduce 4 lanes down to 2 lanes and add, on-street parking and landscaping. So that kind of project can get funds. Or maybe if you want a citywide sidewalk improvement program. Increase sidewalk connectivity or fix sidewalk where it's broken. Those types of projects, there are chances that you can apply and get funds for. But like I said, not for roadway widening.
Thank you.
We need that.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're gonna do 41 because 41 between Excelsior and I don't know, what's that?
Past rolls.
No, going north. They've
To the bus
approved that,
depot.
huh?
To the bus depot,
Up.
the bus station there.
Yeah, that's basically.
North,
yeah.
41
Yeah.
from Excelsior to
Yeah.
Elkhorn.
Elkhorn. I couldn't think Elkhorn. They approved that.
So whatever has already been approved,
Oh, okay. They were just
probably
looking for
should,
funny.
yeah,
They got
probably
it.
would go through. Any new project that's
okay.
coming in, actually, I shouldn't say that because they pulled out of one project in Riverside County, which made RCTC mad.
Wonder why.
But more or less, whatever has been approved
Oh, okay.
should be able to go through.
Okay.
I know there is a lot of discussion going on that missing link on the 99 where it's still 2 lanes. And I think it's in it's between Tulare and
Delano.
until you reach 198. So from Tulare till 198, there is that area of 99, which is still 4 lanes. And the county wanted that to be widened to 6, just like rest of 99. And Caltrans is saying no, they're not going to move forward on that one. So
You said for safety, so would traffic signals on like what you could argue is a safe routes to school or to get kids across? Do
absolutely.
you think there's,
So I have in your guidelines, there's an entire list of what projects would be screened out, and all those types of projects would be eligible for grant funding if you're applying for. So sidewalks, bike lanes, traffic signals, turn lanes at intersections, auxiliary lanes that are less than a mile, crosswalks, pedestrian lights at schools. Anything that's kind of related to safety and improving safety related operations is going to be exempt. But nothing that is capacity enhancing. Anything that's capacity enhancing is not.
Any other questions from council? We'll go ahead and open up to the public.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any public questions or comments? Y'all are tired, aren't you? So I'm going to bring it back to council. Is there any online? Is there online questions or comments? Okay, I'll bring it back to council. Bringing it back to council.
Doesn't need to,
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second it.
Everyone's tired. I vote aye. Forth,
Aye.
Garza,
Aye.
Lyons,
Yes.
Gornick.
Aye.
Passes. Brief city council reports and requests. Mr. Garza,
I have none.
Mr. Lyons.
So I would like to apologize again to the public and to the rest of the council for being late tonight. I literally did just work 6 days in a row. And I tried like heck to be here on time. And then even when I got here, I know all of you noticed, I got up and ran out the door like my hair was on fire. I had a very good reason, and I really don't want to go into it. Why? Probably should not, right?
No, probably not.
Okay, so I will not. And but I just want everyone to understand that I love this town. I don't have deep pockets. This is why I started as a volunteer firefighter back in 2002. I care about this city. I don't have deep pockets, so I figured giving time and effort was worth more than money. And that's just another extension of why I sit on council. And I can appreciate the fact that we don't always agree, which is a good thing. But at the same time, we come to the same resolution. And it's important that we get there in a just way, in a meaningful way. I just don't want the people that work for our city to fall under their illusion that there's a reason to jump ship because now is not the time, by all means. We're nowhere near that. Trust me, I'll tell you when it's time to jump. I will. I love the town enough to do it for them. But yeah, I appreciate all you guys. Nathan, I appreciate your office. Even though Michelle and Amanda are not here, I appreciate them. All of you guys, Frank, young lady, sir. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Councilmember Orth.
Well, I would like to start off by saying I do too appreciate all the hard work everyone does, and I'm by no means saying that we need to jump ship. I think we have a good city. I think we have a good management team. I just want to look at all options. That's it. And going back, I know I don't want this to sound like it's coming back or a whatever. But last council, we had a resolution to sign off on a subdivision that we were, at least took the impression that they would finish it the way they did the other side of the road. But come to find out, I had numerous neighbors come out and watch, or not watch, but came out later on. We had a meeting in our neighborhood about it. And a lot of our neighbors are not happy about the way Woodside Homes finished the road that is an access road. So I've reached out, and I do believe Nathan and Frank are talking about it or figuring out something what's going to go on. But one thing I did make a promise to my neighbors and everyone in my neighborhood that I wish we could always get something done before we allow a company, Fortune 500 company, promise that they will do it a certain way. Because if anyone wants to come out there, and had a couple people, had one on council come look at it, and it's by no means is it the way I believe our city should represent two different streets that are that close to each other. But with that said, we'll go on. I want to thank everyone for all the hard work. I mean, budgets are very hard to do, and this was a very long night, and a lot of people put a lot of heart, tears, and sweat and into it, and some people take it as others are questioning their loyalty or their trustworthiness. It's not that. It's 100% not that at all. It's 100% that we all answer to the citizens, and we want the citizens to see everything. Yeah, should they be here? Yeah, but we can't put 27,000 people in here. So we also have to have someone on the police force driving around, make sure we're all safe. So with that said, I mean, it's a process. Everyone up here does it a different way, and if what I did makes people think that they need to jump ship, I apologize, because that's not what the intentions were for, because I don't think no one needs to jump ship. But at the same time, we have to sometimes make hard decisions in life, and that's what I got. Thank you.
I don't know what meeting those two guys attended. I enjoyed the meeting. I thought it was great. I like reaching for the brass ring, and
Right.
I think everybody doing a great job, and it's evidenced by the fact that each year we get fewer and fewer budget deficits, and then we just got to keep going. The best days of Lemoore are ahead of us, so let's keep it up.
Okay, now we go.
I'll try to be brief.
Now
No,
we
just
got-
kidding.
That guy half hour ago.
I attended Fleet Week in San Pedro last month by invitation. Also attended LAFCO meeting, nothing really to report out of there. Councilmember Gornick and myself also attended the Memorial Day ceremony put on by the Fleet Reserve on Memorial Day at the cemetery. We had a nice chat with Captain O'Connor. I attended the KWRA meeting, not a lot to report out of there. Also, Kings Lions Brewfest has accepted the check on behalf of the Recreation Department. Continue to attend Board of Supervisor meetings as my schedule allows. And, let's see, met with a representative for Mathis's office with some staff and also Councilmember Bornick. Also met with McCarthy's office. Also attended press conference for the King's Fair. And Kings County Water Town Hall meeting in Hanford just recently. And also Nathan and myself will be attending the League of California City Policy Committee in-person meetings coming up this week. And there wasn't a whole lot coming up on the pipeline so far for July, but that could probably change. So keep an eye on the website. Lots of stuff going on in Parks and Rec. So keep an eye out there too. And with that, we will
Hey,
adjourn.
I got one question for you, real
Sure.
quick. Did anybody get reached out to by an Emmett McCormick on email about the F-35 fighter jet program?
No.
Okay.
What
Did
about?
you?
Yes.
What are they doing?
He just wants us, he wants a letter of support for the F-35 program.
They can forward it to you.
They're here.
They can forward it.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I'm gonna do. I was
Thank
just
you.
curious if it needed to happen. All right, thanks. Sorry.
No, thank you. That's important. Okay, with that, we're adjourned.